The darkness had weight. Marcus Thorne Wright knew this the way other men knew their wives' voices or the smell of their mother's cooking. In the dream, always the same dream, the darkness pressed against his chest until breathing became a conscious choice, an act of defiance against the sand and smoke, and the screaming that never quite stopped even after he woke. The boy's name had been Private Daniel Reeves, 22 years old, from Boise, Idaho, with a girlfriend named Sarah and a college acceptance letter folded in his breast pocket. Marcus had carried him 400 yards through enemy fire, feeling the warm blood soak through both their uniforms, listening to Danny beg him to promise, just promise, that someone would tell Sarah he'd tried to come home. Marcus had made that promise. Danny had died anyway, halfway through it, his last word an incomplete apology that Marcus would replay for the rest of his life. The clock read 2:47 a.m. when his eyes snapped open. His sheets were soaked through, and across the narrow room, Sienna Grace slept in the twin bed he'd moved there 6 months ago after the nightmares had gotten worse. She'd asked why she couldn't sleep in her own room anymore, and he'd told her the heating was better in here, which was a lie, but at 8 years old she'd accepted it with the kind of trust that made his chest ache. He watched the rise and fall of her breathing, counted each one like he used to count rounds in a magazine. Alive. Safe. Here. The three words that mattered more than any prayer. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Julia, his sister, timestamped 10 minutes ago. Still having them. She worked nights at the crisis center downtown, knew his patterns better than he did sometimes. He didn't respond. What was there to say that she didn't already know? Instead, Marcus stood moving through the darkness of their apartment with the muscle memory of 4 tours in places where light meant death. Their place was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen, where everything worked but nothing matched. The rent was $1,200 a month, which was $800 more than it should have been, but this was Queens, and beggars couldn't be choosers. And at least the locks were solid, and the neighbors minded their business. He made coffee in the machine Julia had bought him 3 Christmases ago, watched the sky turn from black to gray through the window above the sink. Somewhere out there, the city was waking up stockbrokers and lawyers and people whose biggest worry was whether the subway would make them late for their corner office jobs. Marcus had been one of them once in a different lifetime, before the Army recruiter had promised him purpose and discipline and a way to pay for the engineering degree he'd never finished. The coffee tasted like burnt regret, but he drank it anyway. At 6 a.m., he started the pancakes. Sienna's favorite, with chocolate chips arranged in a smiley face because she'd seen it in some movie and decided it was what happy families did. The batter sizzled in the pan, and he thought about Danny Reeves's mother, wondered if she still made her son's favorite breakfast on his birthday, wondered if Sarah had ever opened that college acceptance letter, or if she'd burned it like he would have watched him. Sienna appeared in the doorway wearing her school uniform, and one sock, her hair a chaos of brown curls that she'd inherited from her mother, along with the stubborn chin and the way her nose wrinkled when she was thinking hard about something. "Daddy." Not a question, a statement of fact, like she was confirming his existence. "Morning, Bug. You had another one." He flipped the pancake, watched the edges turn golden. "How'd you know?" "Your eyes get puffy, and I woke up in your room again." She climbed onto the kitchen stool, began the complicated process of putting on her other sock. Was it about the helicopter? Sometimes Marcus forgot how much she noticed, how much she'd had to grow up understanding things no 8-year-old should have to catalog, like grocery lists, daddy's nightmares, the tight budget, the reason mommy didn't call anymore. "Yeah, Bug, the helicopter. The one where you saved the man, tried to save him." Sienna considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. "Mrs. Mitchell says trying is the same as doing if you did your best." Mrs. Evelyn Mitchell taught 3rd grade science at PS 112 and had taken a particular interest in Sienna after the parent-teacher conference, where Marcus had shown up still wearing his janitorial uniform because his shift had run late. She'd looked at him with something between pity and respect, then told him his daughter was the brightest student she'd taught in 20 years. "Mitchell's a smart lady," Marcus said, sliding the pancake onto a plate. "But sometimes your best isn't enough. But you still have to try right. That's what makes you a good person." And there it was, the question underneath the question, the one she'd been asking in different ways ever since her mother had packed 2 suitcases and walked out 4 years ago, leaving a note on the kitchen counter that started with "I'm sorry" and ended with You deserve better than a woman who married a soldier and got a night watchman instead. Marcus set the plate in front of Sienna, arranged himself on the stool beside her, even though it made his knees hurt. He'd taken shrapnel in his left leg during his third deployment, nothing serious enough for a medal, but enough that cold mornings reminded him his body was keeping score. A good person keeps showing up even when they're scared, even when it's hard, even when nobody's watching to give them credit for it. That's the difference between heroes in movies and real people doing their best. Real people get tired, but they get up anyway. Sienna absorbed this while cutting her pancake into precise squares. Like you getting up to make me breakfast even though you're tired from working all night. Exactly like that. Then you're a real person doing your best, and that makes you a good daddy. Something in Marcus's throat closed up tight. He pulled Sienna into a hug that she tolerated for exactly 7 seconds before squirming free because she was 8 and hugs were only acceptable in measured doses. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence. Marcus washed the dishes while Sienna double-checked her backpack with the methodical precision of someone who'd learned early that forgotten homework meant disappointed teachers, and disappointed teachers meant another thing for Daddy to worry about. The medical bills sat in a pile on the counter where Marcus had left them last night. $340 for Sienna's asthma medication this month, the insurance company having decided that her prescription didn't meet their criteria for coverage, despite the letter from her pediatrician and the emergency room visit last winter, when she'd nearly stopped breathing during a particularly bad attack. Marcus had called them 4 times, been transferred to 7 different departments, spent 90 minutes on hold listening to Muzak and recorded messages about how much the company valued his business. In the end, they'd offered him a payment plan at 18% interest, and he'd taken it because what choice did he have when your daughter needed to breathe? He folded the bills and shoved them in his jacket pocket. Thought about the $8.25 an hour. He made mopping floors at Silverstone Global. Did the math in his head for the 1,000th time, 40 hours a week times $8.25 minus taxes meant around $100 a month after the government took its share. Rent was wound $200. Medication $340. Groceries maybe $400 if he was careful. Utilities another $150. The numbers never quite worked. Every month he juggled which bill to pay late, which creditor to apologize to, which necessity to reclassify as a luxury. Sienna needed new shoes. Her toes were cramped in the current pair, but new shoes cost $60, and $60 meant choosing between electricity and a phone line. He'd sold most of what he owned worth selling. The military had given him medals and commendations and a certificate of appreciation suitable for framing. None of them bought groceries. His silver star sat in the bottom of his sock drawer wrapped in an old t-shirt because the pawn shop owner had looked at it with apology in his eyes and explained that valor didn't have resale value. Daddy, we're going to be late. Marcus checked his watch. 7:45. School started at 8:15, and the walk took 20 minutes if Sienna didn't stop to examine every interesting crack in the sidewalk. They bundled into jackets, his from Goodwill, hers still good because Julia had bought it new last Christmas, and headed out into the October morning. Queens woke up loud car horns and construction, and the bodega owner yelling at someone about paying their tab. Marcus kept Sienna's hand in his, navigated the cracked pavement with the situational awareness that had kept him alive in Kandahar. The other parents at PS 112 had their routines too. Marcus recognized them by silhouette, now the mom with the designer purse who drove a BMW and always looked vaguely disgusted by the school's facade, the date in the expensive suit who spent drop-off barking into his phone about quarterly earnings, the nanny who brought 3 kids in a minivan and looked as tired as Marcus felt. They didn't talk to him much. He tried those first few weeks after Sienna had started at PS 112, smiled, introduced himself, asked the normal parent questions about play dates and school projects. But something in their eyes when they looked at his Goodwill jacket and the calluses on his hands had made it clear Marcus Wright existed in a different tax bracket, a different universe. And while they'd be polite, they had no interest in letting their children get too close to whatever circumstances had put him there. Mrs. Mitchell waited at the school entrance, greeting each student with genuine warmth that seemed impossible to manufacture. When she saw Sienna, her whole face lit up. "Good morning, Miss Wright. I heard you finished your butterfly observation journal early." Sienna nodded, suddenly shy. "I wanted to draw all the stages. Mrs. Garcia's daughter had a chrysalis in her garden, and she let me watch. That's wonderful initiative. Mrs. Mitchell's gaze shifted to Marcus. Mr. Wright, do you have a moment? His stomach dropped. In his experience, teachers asking for moments never meant anything good. Sienna Honeyhead inside. I'll be right there. Sienna obeyed, joining the stream of students filing through the doors. Marcus waited until she was out of earshot before turning back to Mrs. Mitchell. Is something wrong? Her grades. Her grades are perfect, highest in the class. Mrs. Mitchell had that look teachers got when they were about to say something uncomfortable. I wanted to mention that she's been asking questions about her mother. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. What kind of questions? Where she is, why she left, whether it was Sienna's fault. Mrs. Mitchell's voice gentled. I told her that sometimes adults make choices that have nothing to do with their children, but I thought you should know, in case she hasn't brought it up at home. She hadn't. Sienna had stopped asking about her mother 6 months after the departure had accepted the empty chair at dinner with the kind of resigned pragmatism that broke Marcus's heart. He thought maybe she'd forgotten, or at least filed it away in whatever mental drawer 8-year-olds use for things too complicated to process. Thank you for telling me. I'll talk to her. Mr. Wright, Mrs. Mitchell hesitated. Sienna is remarkably resilient, but she's also 8. The questions might get harder before they get easier. Marcus nodded because what else could he do? Thanked her again, watched her disappear into the building where his daughter was learning fractions and vocabulary and the lesson that sometimes the people who were supposed to stay left anyway. The subway ride into Manhattan took 40 minutes and cost $2.75 each way. Marcus stood in the crowded car, hand wrapped around the pole, watching the tunnel lights strobe past. Around him, people scrolled through phones and read newspapers and existed in the bubble that city dwellers perfected to survive proximity to strangers. No one made eye contact. No one spoke unless absolutely necessary. He thought about Mrs. Mitchell's words, thought about the conversation waiting for him at home, about how to explain to an 8-year-old that her mother had looked at their life, the cramped apartment, the tight budget, the husband who mopped floors instead of commanding respect in some corner office, and decided it wasn't enough, that she wasn't enough, that Marcus wasn't enough. The truth was simpler and crueler. Sarah Wright Nay Morrison had married a decorated soldier with a future and wound up with a janitor with a past. She'd given it 4 years, tried to make it work, then woken up one morning and realized she was 28 years old, and this was the rest of her life, and the exit was right there if she was brave enough to take it. She'd been brave enough. Marcus couldn't even hate her for it, just mourn the collateral damage named Sienna, who hadn't asked to be born into a marriage held together by optimism and stubbornness. Silverstone Global occupied floors 38 through 45 of a glass tower in Midtown. Marcus entered through the service entrance at 6:30 p.m., nodded to the evening security guard, changed into his gray uniform, in the maintenance closet that smelled like industrial cleaner and mildew. His shift ran from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. and 4 nights a week, which meant he slept from 4 to 11 and picked Sienna up at 3:30 and existed in a state of perpetual exhaustion that he'd learned to navigate the same way people learn to navigate chronic pain. The night crew was small, 2 other janitors, a security team of 4, and whatever executives worked late enough to witness the invisible people who kept their pristine offices pristine. Marcus had been doing this for 3 years now, had learned the rhythms of the building, which executives left coffee rings on expensive desks, which ones actually noticed when he refilled their paper towel dispensers. No one had ever learned his name. He was part of the furniture, as invisible as the air ducts and the emergency lighting. Tonight he started on 42, the executive floor, where the real decisions happened. The boardroom took up the western corner floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a view of Manhattan that probably cost more per square foot than Marcus paid for his entire apartment. He'd Googled it once. Office space in this building ran 80 per square foot annually. The boardroom was roughly 2,000 square feet. Someone was paying $170,000 a year just for the privilege of holding meetings with a view. Marcus pushed his cleaning cart past darkened offices, dumped trash bins, vacuumed carpets, wiped down surfaces with the kind of methodical precision the Army had beaten into him. Every task completed correctly. Every corner checked. No detail too small to matter. At 10:30, the boardroom lights blazed on. Marcus glanced up from where he was mopping the hallway and saw them filing in men in suits that cost more than his monthly rent. Women in dresses that probably required dry cleaning, everyone carrying the same air of casual importance that came from never having to check their bank balance before buying groceries. He recognized some faces from the company website. Thomas Bradford, CFO. Michelle Sanders, VP of Operations. Others he'd seen in passing, the kind of people who looked through janitors the way you look through glass. And then there was Catherine Bennett. She rolled in last, her wheelchair navigating the doorway with practiced ease. Marcus had seen her before she was CEO, her face on the company's about page, but never this close. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe mid-40s with dark hair cut in a practical bob and gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything they touched. She wore a navy suit jacket over a white blouse, and when she positioned herself at the head of the table, there was nothing apologetic about it. The door closed. Marcus went back to mopping, but slowly within earshot. Parties weren't unusual. Silverstone Global celebrated every milestone: quarterly earnings, new client acquisitions, successful mergers. The champagne always came from the same expensive vineyard, the caterers always wore black, and the executives always got loud around midnight when they'd drunk enough to forget they had subordinates. Through the boardroom's glass walls, Marcus watched Catherine Bennett accept congratulations with the kind of controlled politeness that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. A man in his late 50s held court near the bar, silver-haired and confident. In that way, wealthy people were confident, like the world was a stage built specifically for their performance. Sarah Caldwell materialized beside Marcus so quietly he almost didn't notice. She was Catherine Bennett's executive assistant, early 30s, always polite when she passed him in the hallways at odd hours. "Big night," she said, not quite looking at him. "They celebrating something. Takahashi merger, $800 million deal, biggest acquisition in company history." Her voice held something strained. "Ms. Bennett's been working 16-hour days for 6 months to make it happen." Marcus understood the subtext. Sarah was worried about her boss. He'd seen it before, the way assistants orbited their executives with protective anxiety. "She looks tired." "She is." Sarah glanced toward the boardroom. "She doesn't let anyone see it, but I know. Haven't seen her this stressed since the divorce." Marcus didn't respond. It wasn't his business. He was the janitor, and janitors didn't get involved in executive drama no matter how much they might overhear while emptying trash bins. Sarah seemed to realize she'd said too much. "Sorry, long day. I should get back." She disappeared into the boardroom, and Marcus continued his circuit. Wiped down water fountains, checked the men's room, soap dispensers, replaced the paper towels in the kitchen. Normal night, normal work. At 11:30 p.m., the tone in the boardroom changed. Marcus was cleaning the offices on the opposite side of the floor, but sound carried in buildings like this. Laughter got louder. Voices rose. And then one voice cut through the rest, booming and jovial, and edged with something that made the hair on Marcus's neck stand up. He moved closer without quite meaning to. Found himself near the boardroom's glass wall, mop in hand, watching. The silver-haired man had cornered Catherine Bennett. She sat very still in her wheelchair, hands folded in her lap, face carefully blank in the way people got when they were trying not to show they were afraid. The man leaned down, spoke directly into her face while 20 other people watched. Marcus couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language. Could see Catherine's shoulders tighten. Could see her eyes drop to her lap. The man straightened, addressed the room, made a gesture toward Catherine's wheelchair that was unmistakably mocking. The room went silent, and still no one moved. 20 people with expensive educations and corner offices and the kind of power that came from six-figure salaries, and not one of them said a word. The man reached out, put his hand on Catherine Bennett's shoulder in a gesture that might have been comforting if there was any comfort in it. But Marcus had spent enough time in war zones to recognize a power play when he saw one. Catherine flinched. Barely, but enough. Marcus's mop clattered to the floor. He didn't remember deciding to move. Didn't remember crossing the hallway or opening the boardroom door. One second he was standing outside, the next he was 10 feet from the silver-haired man who turned to stare at him with the kind of outrage reserved for peasants who forgot their place. "Sir," Marcus kept his voice level, calm, the same tone he'd used to talk down situations in Kandahar when calm was the only thing standing between life and death. "I think you should step back." The room crystallized. Every face turned toward him. Every conversation died mid-sentence. The silver-haired man blinked like Marcus was some hallucination his scotch had conjured. "Excuse me, step back from Ms. Bennett, please. Do you know who I am? A man who's had too much to drink." Marcus didn't move, making a fool of himself in front of people who won't forget it tomorrow. Somewhere behind him, someone gasped. Marcus kept his eyes on the silver-haired man, watched his face cycle through disbelief to rage to something calculating and dangerous. "You're the janitor." Not a question, an accusation. "You clean toilets and empty trash, and you think you can speak to me like that? I think I can ask you to treat Ms. Bennett with basic human decency." The man's face went purple. "Security. Someone call security. Get this man out of here." Two guards materialized from somewhere, young guys in matching uniforms who probably made $12 an hour to look intimidating. They approached Marcus with apology already forming in their eyes, the kind of apology that said, "We know this isn't fair, but we have to keep our jobs." The taller one reached for Marcus's arm. Marcus didn't mean to move the way he did. Muscle memory took over the thousands of hours of hand-to-hand combat training that lived in his body deeper than conscious thought. He redirected the guard's grip with a twist of his wrist, used the man's own momentum to guide him off balance. Not aggressive, just efficient. The guard stumbled back more surprised than hurt. His partner pulled out pepper spray. "Gentlemen," the voice came from behind Marcus, sharp with authority. "Lower your weapons, now." Marcus turned. An older man had stepped forward from the crowd, maybe early 60s with steel gray hair and the kind of bearing that screamed military even in a civilian suit. He carried himself like someone accustomed to being obeyed, and when his eyes landed on Marcus, they widened with recognition. "Sergeant Wright." The room tilted sideways. Marcus knew that voice, knew those eyes, hadn't heard that particular combination of authority and something almost like pride in 9 years. "Colonel Patterson, sir." James Patterson had commanded Marcus's unit during his second and third deployments, had been the one to recommend him for the Silver Star, had stood at the hospital in Landstuhl and promised Marcus that what he'd done in that helicopter mattered even if Danny Reeves hadn't made it home. Now Patterson walked across the boardroom like he owned it, which Marcus vaguely remembered from the company website he kind of did as a board member, and stopped 3 feet from Marcus with his hands clasped behind his back in at ease position. "Last time I saw you," Patterson said slowly, "you were pulling Lieutenant Reeves out of a burning helicopter in Kandahar. You had a broken leg and third-degree burns across 20% of your body, but you carried that boy 400 yards through enemy fire anyway." Phones came out. Marcus watched the crowd pull out their devices with the same synchronized motion, saw them start typing furiously. "Marcus Wright, Silver Star, Kandahar helicopter." "That was a long time ago, sir." "Not long enough to forget," Patterson's voice carried to every corner of the room. "You saved 12 American lives in 4 tours. 12 soldiers who went home to their families because you refused to leave anyone behind. I gave you the Silver Star myself." The silver-haired man had gone very pale. "He's a janitor. He attacked my security team. He's Sergeant Marcus Wright." Patterson finally looked at the man, and Marcus saw the contempt there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. "And he didn't attack anyone. He prevented an escalation." Patterson turned to the guards. "You boys are dismissed. Thank you for responding so quickly." The guards fled, probably grateful to escape the tension. Catherine Bennett spoke for the first time, her voice steady despite everything. "Mr. Sterling, I think you should leave." So that was his name, Richard Sterling. Marcus filed it away in the mental catalog where he kept information about people who needed watching. Sterling's jaw worked like he was chewing through responses and discarding them. Finally, he settled on, "This isn't over, Catherine. You humiliated me in front of my investors. There will be consequences." "The only consequence," Catherine said quietly, "is that you won't be welcome at Silverstone events anymore. Sarah, please ensure Mr. Sterling finds his way out." Sarah Caldwell moved with the efficiency of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. She gestured toward the door with professional courtesy that somehow made it clear this was not a request. Sterling left. The room exhaled collectively. Marcus became aware of people staring. a phone still out recording or photographing or live streaming for all he knew. He'd stepped into the middle of something that had nothing to do with mopping floors, and now he was stuck there while 20 executives tried to figure out what the hell had just happened. Mr. Wright. Catherine rolled her wheelchair closer, navigating around the champagne table with practiced ease. Thank you. That was, I don't know that anyone's ever. She stopped, composed herself. Thank you. Marcus looked at her properly for the first time. Saw the slight tremor in her hands that she was fighting to control. Saw the exhaustion carved into the corners of her eyes. Saw someone who'd been fighting alone for too long and had forgotten what it felt like when someone stood beside her instead of just watching. He was out of line, ma'am. Someone needed to say so. 20 people in this room, and you were the only one who did. Catherine's voice held an edge sharp enough to cut. That says more about them than I care to examine right now. Patterson cleared his throat. Ms. Bennett, if I might have a word with Sergeant Wright. Catherine nodded, rolled back to give them space. Patterson waited until the crowd had mostly dispersed back to their champagne and uncomfortable conversations before speaking. What are you doing working as a janitor, son, making rent, sir? You were one of the finest soldiers I ever commanded. You could have done anything. Respectfully, sir, that's not how it works. Marcus kept his voice down. I came home with PTSD and a medical discharge and a daughter to raise. The VA offered therapy and a disability check that covers about half my bills. The Army taught me to shoot straight and follow orders. Neither of those skills translate to civilian jobs that don't involve asking if people want fries with that. Patterson's expression flickered disappointment, maybe, or recognition. You have a daughter, 8 years old, Sienna, and her mother, gone. Marcus didn't elaborate. Patterson was sharp enough to fill in the blanks. I'm sorry, son. Patterson handed him a business card from his jacket pocket. That's my personal cell. You need anything, a reference, a contact? Just someone to talk to, you call me. Understood? Yes, sir. Patterson's voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial. What you started tonight won't end quietly. You'll need allies, Sergeant. Sterling is powerful, and powerful men don't forgive public humiliation. He squeezed Marcus's shoulder once. But you did the right thing. Sometimes that's all that matters. Patterson left. The party broke up shortly after executives gathering their things and whispering to each other with the energy of people who just witnessed something they'd be talking about for months. Marcus retrieved his mop, went back to cleaning like nothing had happened. But his hands were shaking, and when he caught his reflection in one of the darkened office windows, he barely recognized the man staring back. He got home at 4:15 a.m., body aching and mind racing. Sienna was asleep at Julia's apartment next door, the arrangement they'd worked out, so Marcus didn't have to leave an 8-year-old alone while he worked nights. He stood in the doorway of Julia's place, watching Sienna's small form curled under a frozen blanket, and felt the weight of every decision that had led here. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Mr. Wright, this is Sarah Caldwell, Ms. Bennett's assistant. She would like to meet with you tomorrow at 2 p.m. if you're available. The matter is urgent. Please reply to confirm. Marcus stared at the message, read it 3 times. Knew that nothing good came from CEOs wanting urgent meetings with janitors, but also knew he couldn't afford to say no when the person signing his paycheck sent an invitation. He typed back, confirmed. Where should I meet her? The response came immediately, 42nd floor executive suite. Ask for me at reception. At 6 a.m., Marcus made pancakes while Sienna shuffled into the kitchen with bedhead and one sock. She climbed onto her stool, accepted the plate he slid across to her, and studied his face with the intensity of a detective examining evidence. You look different, Daddy. Different how? Less tired, no. More awake tired instead of sleepy tired. He had no idea what that meant, but nodded anyway. Big night at work. Did you have to clean something gross? No bug, just had a conversation with some people. Sienna considered this while cutting her pancake into precise squares. Good people or bad people? Marcus thought about Catherine Bennett's carefully controlled fear, about Richard Sterling's casual cruelty, about Colonel Patterson's recognition, about the 20 executives who'd watched and done nothing. Complicated people. Mrs. Mitchell says there's no such thing as complicated people, just people making complicated choices. Mrs. Mitchell's very wise. They ate in silence for a while. Through the window, Marcus could see the city waking up, the same dance of cars and construction, and people rushing to wherever they needed to be. Somewhere out there, Richard Sterling was probably still fuming. Somewhere, Catherine Bennett was probably not sleeping. And somewhere, decisions were being made that would ripple into Marcus's life in ways he couldn't predict. His phone buzzed on the counter. Not a text this time, a notification from YouTube. Julia had texted him a link with 3 words, "You went viral." Marcus opened it with the kind of dread reserved for seeing your name in headlines. The video was grainy security footage shot from the boardroom camera. Someone had already posted it with the caption, "Janitor defends CEO from abusive investor hero." The view counter sat at 3.2 million and climbing. 3 million people had watched him step between Catherine Bennett and Richard Sterling. 3 million strangers now knew his face, his name, the fact that he mopped floors for minimum wage. The comments scrolled past too fast to read, but he caught fragments. This man is a hero. Meanwhile, 20 executives just watched Silver Star recipient working as janitor. America is broken. Someone get this guy a better job. Marcus closed the app, looked at Sienna, who was watching him with those 2 perceptive eyes. "Daddy, what's wrong? Nothing bug, just work stuff. Are you in trouble?" The question hit harder than it should have. Marcus set down his coffee, pulled Sienna into a hug that she tolerated for exactly 7 seconds. "No, sweetheart, I'm not in trouble, but things might get complicated. Because you're complicated, people making complicated choices." Something like that. He dropped Sienna at school 40 minutes later, watching her disappear into the building with her backpack and her lopsided ponytail. Listen. Mitchell waved from the entrance and Marcus waved back, wondering how long it would take before the video found its way to PS 112 and the other parents started looking at him differently. Julia called while he was walking home. He answered because ignoring Julia only made her more persistent. "Have you seen it?" "The video?" "Yeah." "Marcus, you have 5 million views now. 5 million. People are calling you the working class Captain America." "That's ridiculous." "Is it? You stood up to a billionaire to protect someone who couldn't defend herself. That's pretty much the definition of heroic." Marcus stopped walking, stood in the middle of the sidewalk while people flowed around him. "I just asked a drunk guy to step back, Jules, that's all. I didn't save anyone, didn't stop anything terrible from happening. All I did was make a scene that's probably going to get me fired. Or promoted." Julia's voice shifted, took on that particular tone she used when she was about to say something he wouldn't like. "Marcus, I need to tell you something. Emma called this morning. She saw the video." Emma, Sienna's mother, Sarah Wright, who'd walked out 4 years ago and hadn't bothered to send a birthday card since. What did she want? To reconnect, her words. Said she's been thinking about Sienna a lot lately, and maybe it's time to reestablish parental rights. Julia's voice hardened. "She's talking to a lawyer, Marcus. Mentioned your unstable new lifestyle and Sienna's asthma attacks as evidence you can't provide a stable environment." The bottom dropped out of Marcus's stomach. He'd spent 4 years building a life where Sienna didn't have to wonder why her mother didn't love her enough to stay. One viral video and that whole careful construction was crumbling. "I have to go," he said. Marcus, he hung up. Stood there on the corner of Roosevelt Avenue and 82nd Street while the world moved around him and everything he'd tried to protect started falling apart. Julia worked the crisis hotline nights but always made time for Sienna and Marcus, the only family they had left since their parents had died in a car accident when Marcus was 19. She'd been there through the deployments, the divorce, the desperate scramble to keep custody when Sarah had tried to take Sienna. Now Emma was circling back, and Julia would fight beside him again, because that's what family did. At 2 p.m., Marcus arrived at Silverstone Global wearing the only dress shirt he owned and a tie Julia had bought him for court appearances back when he was fighting for custody. The security guard at the front desk did a double take, then waved him through with something like respect. The elevator ride to 42 felt like ascending to execution. Sarah Caldwell met him when the doors opened, professional and composed despite the chaos that must have followed last night's party. "Mr. Wright, thank you for coming. Ms. Bennett is waiting in her office." Catherine Bennett's office was smaller than Marcus expected. Still nice floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture space for her wheelchair to navigate, but not ostentatious. The desk was covered in paperwork, and 3 computer monitors showed what looked like financial projections. Catherine looked up when he entered. She'd traded last night's suit for something more casual, but still professional, and the exhaustion in her eyes had deepened into something permanent. "Mr. Wright, please sit." Marcus sat in the chair across from her desk, waited. "I wanted to thank you properly for last night. What you did stepping in when no one else would, that took courage most people don't have." "I just did what was right, ma'am." "Kate, please. I think after last night we're past formalities." She rolled closer, hands folded in her lap. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Why did you help me?" Marcus considered the question. The real answer was complicated because he'd spent 4 tours watching people suffer in silence, because he knew what it felt like to be dismissed by people who thought their power made them invulnerable, because Sienna was learning what it meant to stand up for others, and he needed to model what he was teaching. Because someone needed to, that's all. Kate studied him with those gray eyes that seemed to see more than Marcus wanted to show. "In 20 years of building this company, that was the first time someone defended me. Not because I'm weak, I'm not, but because it was the right thing to do." She opened a folder on her desk, pulled out a stack of papers. "These are formal complaints filed by Silverstone employees in the past 18 months. Sexual harassment, discrimination, hostile work environment, 47 complaints in total." She pushed the folder toward him. "My previous ethics director was a friend of Richard Sterling's. He buried every single one." Marcus opened the folder, read the first page, a woman named Amy Donovan, describing a supervisor's unwanted advances, the way he cornered her in supply closets, how she'd reported it, and been put on a performance improvement plan 3 days later. His jaw tightened. "I need someone I can trust," Kate said. "Someone who can't be bought or intimidated. Someone who actually gives a damn about protecting people instead of protecting profit." "You're offering me a job. Director of Ethics and Employee Advocacy. 95,000 a year, full benefits, including family health insurance. Flexible schedule to accommodate your daughter. You set your own hours as long as the work gets done." Marcus's brain stuttered trying to process those numbers. 95,000. 3 times what he made now. Health insurance that would cover Sienna's asthma medication, the specialist she needed, but he couldn't afford. "I'm a janitor, Kate. I don't have a college degree. I don't have experience in corporate." "You have something more valuable than a degree." Kate's voice was firm. "You have a conscience. In this world, that's rare enough to be priceless." Marcus looked at the folder in his hands, thought about Amy Donovan and the 46 other people whose complaints had been shredded because protecting powerful men mattered more than protecting vulnerable employees. "I have conditions." "Name them." "I need to drop my daughter at school every morning and at 8 and pick her up at 3:30. Those hours are non-negotiable. I don't care if the building's burning down, I'm there for Sienna." Done. No media appearances, no interviews. Whatever happened last night with that video, it doesn't follow me into this job. My daughter doesn't become public property because her father went viral. I'll have our legal team draft privacy protections immediately. And if this job hurts Sienna, if the stress or the hours or the publicity affects her negatively, I walk. No notice, no negotiation. I just walk. Kate nodded slowly. "I understand. Anything else?" "Yeah." Marcus met her eyes. "I need you to understand that I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy trying to do better. I will make mistakes. I will probably piss off your board and your executives and everyone who thinks corporate ethics is about protecting the company instead of the people in it. If that's not what you want, say so now and save us both the trouble." Something flickered across Kate's face, respect maybe, or recognition. "That's exactly what I want, Marcus. Someone who will burn down the old system and build something better from the ashes." She extended her hand across the desk. Marcus shook it, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him like body armor. As he stood to leave, Sarah Caldwell slipped into the office with a file folder. "Ms. Bennett, I'm sorry to interrupt, but..." She glanced at Marcus, uncertain. "It's fine, Sarah. Marcus will be joining us soon." "What is it?" Sarah opened the folder, pulled out a single page. "This is a formal complaint filed 6 weeks ago by Amy Donovan, data analyst in the finance department. She's alleging sexual harassment by her supervisor, Scott Thornhill." Kate's jaw tightened. I never saw this. It was routed to the previous ethics director. He marked it resolved, but I dug through the files and found no record of any investigation. And yesterday, Sarah's voice wavered. Yesterday, Scott Thornhill put Amy on a performance improvement plan. First negative review she's ever received. The room temperature dropped about 20 degrees. Marcus looked at the paper in Sarah's hand, saw a young woman's hope reduced to a bureaucratic form filed and forgotten, and punished for the crime of speaking up. I'll take the bomb, he said. When do I start? Monday, Kate said immediately. But Marcus, Amy Donovan is your first case. I want to know everything: who did what, who knew what, and why it was buried. Can you do that? Marcus thought about Danny Reeves dying in his arms, thought about Sienna asking if he was a good person, thought about the 47 complaints gathering dust, while predators kept their corner, offices and victims kept their silence. Yes, ma'am, I can do that. That evening, Marcus picked Sienna up from school and took her for pizza, a splurge he couldn't afford, but suddenly could see affording in the very near future. They sat in the booth by the window while Sienna told him about her day, about how Mrs. Mitchell had announced the Butterfly Project presentations would be next week, and Sienna needed to finish her observation journal. What's your project about? Bug. Metamorphosis. That's when a caterpillar turns into a butterfly. She said the word, carefully, proud of getting it right. But the coolest part is what happens inside the cocoon. The caterpillar doesn't just grow wings, it completely dissolves, turns into liquid. Mrs. Mitchell showed us pictures. It's all goo before it becomes a butterfly. Marcus absorbed this information. That sounds gross. It's science. Sienna took a huge bite of pizza, chewed thoughtfully. Mrs. Mitchell says it's called metamorphosis, and it happens when things need to change, but they can't just add new parts. They have to break down and rebuild completely. Something about those words landed differently than they should have. Marcus thought about his life, breaking down the bomb, the marriage, the future he'd planned, and how maybe that dissolution was necessary before he could become whatever came next. That's pretty smart, Mrs. Mitchell. She's the smartest teacher in the whole school. Sienna wiped tomato sauce off her chin. Daddy, can I ask you something? Always. That lady at work, the one you helped, is she nice? Marcus considered how to answer. She seems nice. I don't know her very well yet. But you helped her anyway, even though you didn't know her. Yeah, Bug, I did. Sienna nodded like this confirmed some theory she'd been developing. That's what makes you a good person. Not that you only help people you know, that you help people because it's right. She went back to her pizza, oblivious to the fact that she just articulated something Marcus had been trying to explain to himself for years. His 8-year-old daughter understood honor better than most adults he'd served with. They walked home through Queens as the October sun dropped toward the horizon. Sienna's hand fit perfectly in Marcus's, and for these few blocks everything was simple. A father and daughter walking home while the city hummed around them. Julia was waiting at the apartment building entrance, arms crossed, expressions somewhere between exasperated and worried. You didn't answer your phone. Left it at home. What's wrong? What's wrong is you have 17 missed calls from reporters. Someone tracked down your address, and now there are 3 news vans parked down the block waiting to interview the viral hero janitor. Marcus's stomach dropped. He looked at Sienna, who was watching the exchange with 2 perceptive eyes. Bug, can you go upstairs with Aunt Julia? I need to make a phone call. Sienna nodded, took Julia's hand. Julia mouthed, be careful, before leading Sienna into the building. Marcus pulled out his phone, found Colonel Patterson's business card still in his wallet from last night. Dialed the number. Patterson answered on the second ring. Sergeant Wright, I wondered when you'd call. Sir, I have news crews outside my apartment and a daughter who doesn't need to see her father turned into a media circus. I don't know how to make this stop. You can't, not once the internet decides you're a story. Patterson's voice gentled. But you can control the narrative. Have you accepted Ms. Bennett's job offer? Yes, sir, starting Monday. Good. Then here's what you do. You release one statement through Silverstone's PR team. Something brief about being grateful for the opportunity to serve the company in a new capacity, that you're looking forward to protecting employee rights, and that you request privacy for your family during this transition. Then you stop talking to reporters. All of them. Forever. That'll work. It'll help. The media has the attention span of a goldfish. Give them one boring quote and they'll move on to the next shiny thing. Marcus breathed out slowly. Thank you, sir. Marcus, one more thing. What you did last night, standing up for Kate Bennett, that took guts. But the fight ahead is going to make last night look like a kindergarten scuffle. Sterling is powerful. The people he protects are powerful. They will come after you with everything they have. You ready for that? Marcus thought about Amy Donovan. About 47 complaints buried and forgotten. About Sienna asking what made someone good. Yes, sir, I'm ready. That night, after Sienna was asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with Amy Donovan's complaint file spread out in front of him. Read it 3 times, memorizing details, the dates Scott Thornhill had made inappropriate comments, the witnesses who'd seen him corner Amy in the supply closet, the HR representative who'd acknowledged receipt of the complaint and then done absolutely nothing. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Mr. Wright, this is Rebecca Walsh. I signed an NDA with Scott Thornhill 3 years ago after he harassed me. I heard what you did for Ms. Bennett. If you investigate him, if you can release me from that NDA, I'll testify. I want my story told. Marcus stared at the message. Typed back, Mom, we'll release you, and thank you for your courage. Another text, this one from Sarah Caldwell. Kate asked me to forward this. It's the video from last night before it went viral. She thought you should see the full context. Marcus opened the attachment, watched security footage of himself stepping between Sterling and Kate, watched the confrontation from an angle that showed Kate's face clearly, the fear she'd been hiding, the tremor in her hands, the way she'd flinched when Sterling reached for her, and then watched himself speak words he barely remembered saying, but which the video's auto captions had transcribed. Dignity isn't measured by job titles. It's measured by how you treat people who can't fight back. 5 million people had heard those words. 5 million strangers had watched a janitor tell a billionaire that power didn't excuse cruelty. Marcus closed the video, looked at Amy Donovan's complaint, at Rebecca Walsh's text, at the decision point standing in front of him like a door he could still choose not to open. He thought about Sienna's butterfly project, about caterpillars dissolving into liquid before they could grow wings, about how transformation required destruction, first required breaking down completely before you could rebuild into something better. His phone sat on the table, Kate Bennett's number and his recent calls. He could still back out, could return to mopping floors in invisible anonymity, in the safety of a life that asked nothing more than showing up and keeping his head down. Or he could step through that door and accept that some goose-stage dissolution was necessary before he could become whatever came next. Marcus picked up the phone, typed a message to Kate. I'll need my team in place by Monday, and I'll need full access to all personnel files, especially anyone connected to Scott Thornhill. This is going to get ugly. Kate's response came immediately. Already approved. Sarah will set up your office tomorrow. Welcome to the fight, Marcus. He set the phone down, looked at the kitchen where he and Sienna ate breakfast, at the couch where they watched movies, at the small, safe life he'd built from the wreckage of everything that came before. Tomorrow he'd tell Sienna about the job, would figure out how to explain that Daddy was changing careers, that things would be different, but hopefully better. Would see if an 8-year-old could understand that sometimes you had to risk everything you'd built to become the person you were supposed to be. But tonight, Marcus sat in the quiet apartment and let himself feel the weight of the choice. The dissolution stage had begun. The caterpillar was turning to liquid. And somewhere on the other side of this transformation, if he survived it, there might be wings. Outside his window, Queens hummed with its usual chaos. Sirens and car horns and the sound of 8 million people trying to survive another day. Marcus Thorne Wright was one of them, no better, no worse, just another person making complicated choices and hoping they added up to something good. Somewhere out there, Richard Sterling was planning his revenge. Somewhere Scott Thornhill was sleeping soundly secure in the knowledge that powerful men always won. Somewhere 47 employees were learning to live with the silence they'd been forced to keep. But somewhere too, Amy Donovan was reading Marcus's response to Rebecca Walsh, was seeing that maybe, just maybe, the system could change. That speaking up didn't have to mean being crushed. That justice wasn't just a word people used to make themselves feel better about doing nothing. Marcus stood, turned off the kitchen light, checked on Sienna one last time before heading to his own room. She slept curled around her stuffed rabbit face, peaceful in a way that made his chest ache. He'd made his choice. Tomorrow the real work began. Revised full story. Part 2 of 3 Part 2 Hidden War. Revised week 1, February year 2. Monday morning arrived with the particular kind of anxiety that accompanies crossing thresholds you can't uncross. Marcus stood outside Silverstone Global at 8:47 a.m., wearing the suit Julia had helped him pick out from a thrift store in Astoria navy blue, slightly too big in the shoulders, but acceptable if he kept the jacket button. Sienna had pronounced him fancy like the dads on TV before he had dropped her at school, which either meant he'd succeeded or 8-year-olds had no fashion standards whatsoever. The elevator to 42 felt different when you weren't pushing a mop cart. People nodded at him, made space, treated him like someone who belonged there instead of someone hired to clean up after them. Marcus tried not to think about how many of these same people had walked past him for 3 years without seeing him at all. Sarah Caldwell waited at reception with a tablet and the kind of organized efficiency that suggested she'd already accomplished more before 9 a.m. than most people did all week. "Mr. Wright, welcome. I've set up your office and scheduled orientations with HR, legal, and IT. Your team is waiting in conference room B." My team. The 2 investigators who've been running the ethics department solo since Director Phillips retired. They're skeptical. Sarah's expression suggested skeptical was diplomatic understatement, but they know the files better than anyone. Conference room B was windowless and smelled like old coffee and institutional despair. 2 people sat at the table, both radiating the particular exhaustion of employees who'd stopped expecting things to improve. The man looked up first, mid-30s, sharp eyes behind wireframe glasses, the kind of wiry build that came from forgetting to eat lunch more often than remembering. Derek Harrison, lead investigator for the past 4 years, if we're being technical about titles that mean nothing when your recommendations get buried anyway. Marcus Wright, yeah, we know. Viral janitor turned director because you went Batman on Richard Sterling. Derek's tone made it clear what he thought of that qualification. Here to save us, all right. The woman across from him sighed with the long-suffering patience of someone used to managing Derek's attitude. Patricia Green, also an investigator, also tired. Unlike Derek, I'm willing to give you a chance before assuming you're another corporate figurehead here to make us look busy while accomplishing nothing. Marcus pulled out a chair, sat facing them both. How many complaints have you investigated in the past year? Derek snorted. Investigated 63. How many did Director Phillips let us actually pursue? 0. He'd read our reports, nod thoughtfully, then explain why pursuing the complaint would be detrimental to company morale or potentially litigious, or whatever excuse protected the executive we'd caught doing something illegal. Patricia pulled a folder from the stack in front of her, slid it across. This is Scott Thornhill, supervisor in finance. We've received 5 formal complaints about him in the past 8 years. Sexual harassment, creating hostile work environment, retaliation against employees who rejected his advances. We documented everything. Witness statements, email evidence, pattern of behavior across multiple victims. Phillips marked each one, resolved through mediation, and buried them. Marcus opened the folder, saw the same information Sarah had shown him, but with additional layers. Photos of Amy Donovan looking exhausted and scared. Transcripts of interviews with coworkers who'd witnessed Scott's behavior but were too afraid to speak up formally. An organizational chart showing Scott's connections to senior executives who golfed with Phillips and donated to the same political campaigns as Richard Sterling. You ready to actually do something about this? Derek and Patricia exchanged glances, some wordless communication passing between them. You understand what you're up against. Patricia's voice carried weight. Scott brings in $8 million in revenue annually. He has friends on the executive team. Going after him means going after the system that's protected him for 8 years. People who've built careers on looking the other way aren't going to suddenly develop consciences because a janitor got promoted. Then we make looking the other way more expensive than doing the right thing. Derek leaned back, arms crossed. Big talk. Let's see if you're still saying that when the board tries to fire you for disrupting the company culture. Marcus stood, walked to the whiteboard mounted on the conference room wall, found a marker that still had ink, wrote Amy Donovan at the top. This is our first case. I want everything, every email Scott sent, every witness who will talk every complaint that was buried. We're building something that can't be dismissed or mediated away, something ironclad. You planning to fire him? Derek sounded interested despite himself. I'm planning to give Ms. Bennett evidence that leaves her no choice but to fire him. Then we're going after everyone who helped hide what he did. Patricia smiled, the first genuine expression Marcus had seen from her own. All right, maybe you're not completely useless. Give me 3 days. Derek pulled out his laptop. I'll have the full file compiled with cross-references and a timeline. But right, you should know Amy Donovan isn't the only active case. Scott put her on a performance improvement plan last week. If she fails and the metrics are designed so she will, he can fire her with cause. She's got maybe 2 months before he manufactures enough documentation to destroy her career. Then we work fast. Amy Donovan agreed to meet at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Silverstone at lunch. Neutral territory she'd specified through Sarah somewhere. She wouldn't risk running into Scott or anyone else from finance who might report back that she was talking to the new ethics director. Marcus arrived early, claimed a corner booth with sight lines to the door. Old habits from places where corner booths meant the difference between seeing trouble coming and dying surprised. Amy walked in at 12:47, looking around with the careful paranoia of someone who'd learned that surveillance was everywhere and trust was earned in increments. She was younger than her file photo suggested. Late 20s maybe, with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of professional clothes that screamed trying too hard to be taken seriously. Her eyes had the exhausted wariness of prey animals. Marcus raised a hand. She crossed to the booth, slid in across from him without making eye contact. Mr. Wright. Marcus, please. He pushed a menu toward her. Order anything. Company's paying. I'm not hungry. When's the last time you ate? Amy's jaw tightened. Why does that matter? Because stress kills appetite, and you look like you haven't slept in weeks. I need you sharp for this conversation, which means I need you fed. Marcus flagged down the waitress, ordered 2 sandwiches and coffee without asking Amy's preference. She could eat or not, but at least the option would be there. They sat in silence until the waitress left. Amy studied the table, picked at her napkin, radiated the kind of tension that came from expecting betrayal. You read my complaint. Not a question. 4 times, along with the 4 previous complaints against Scott Thornhill. And I've been in contact with Rebecca Walsh, Jennifer Blake, and Lisa Whitmore. They're all willing to testify if we release them from their NDAs. Amy's head snapped up. You found the others. They found me. Turns out viral internet fame is occasionally useful. Marcus pulled out his tablet, opened the file Derek had compiled. I need you to walk me through everything, start to finish, every detail, even the ones that seem small or embarrassing. Can you do that? Why should I trust you? The last time I trusted the system, it nearly cost me my job. Fair question. Marcus had no good answer except the truth. You shouldn't trust me. You shouldn't trust anyone who works for Silverstone because the company has spent 8 years proving it doesn't deserve trust. But I'm asking you to try anyway, because if you don't, Scott Thornhill gets away with it again, and the next woman who comes forward gets buried the same way you almost were. The sandwiches arrived. Amy stared at hers like it might contain hidden surveillance equipment. It started 6 months ago. Her voice barely rose above the coffee shop ambient noise. Little things at first, compliments about my clothes, comments about how I dressed up today, must have a hot date. I laugh them off because that's what you do, right? You smile and deflect and hope it stops. It didn't stop. It got worse. He started asking personal questions. Was I seeing anyone? What did I do for fun? Would I want to grab drinks after work sometime? I said no. Professionally, made excuses about being busy, having other commitments. He kept pushing. Marcus took notes documenting everything. When did it escalate to physical contact? Amy's hands shook slightly. She wrapped them around her coffee cup like the warmth might steady her. 3 months ago, I was in the supply closet getting printer paper. He followed me in, stood between me and the door, put his hand on my waist, leaned in close, told me I seemed tense, and maybe I needed to relax more. What did you do? Pushed him away, told him that was inappropriate and he needed to stop. He laughed, said I was taking things too seriously, that he was just being friendly. Then he left and I stood there shaking and wondering if I'd imagined how threatening it felt. You didn't imagine it. No, Amy finally looked at Marcus directly. I filed the complaint the next day. Documented everything, dates, times, what he said, witnesses who'd seen him corner me. HR acknowledged receipt. I thought that meant something would happen. Instead, 2 weeks later, Scott called me into his office and told me my performance had been slipping. Gave me my first negative review in 4 years of perfect evaluations. Marcus's pen pressed hard enough against the tablet to leave marks. The performance improvement plan. 30 days to meet metrics he designed to be impossible. If I fail, I'm terminated for cause. No severance, no unemployment benefits, and a permanent black mark that'll follow me to every job I apply for. Amy's voice cracked. I'm supporting my mother. She has Alzheimer's, and the care facility costs $3,000 a month. If I lose this job, I lose her care. That's what Scott's counting on, that I'm too desperate to keep fighting. The coffee shop noise faded into background static. Marcus thought about Sienna's medical bills, about the mathematics of desperation, about how predators always knew exactly which pressure points would make their victims choose silence over justice. He miscalculated. Did he? Because I'm sitting here talking to you and Scott's still in his corner office collecting his salary and probably already picking out his next target. Not for long. Marcus closed the tablet. I'm going to investigate this properly. Interview witnesses, document the pattern, build a case that can't be dismissed. Then I'm going to recommend Scott's immediate termination. But Amy, I need you to understand something. What? This is going to get ugly. Scott will fight back. So will the people who've protected him. They'll try to discredit you, paint you as vindictive or oversensitive or making it up for attention. They'll dig into your personal life looking for ammunition. It's going to be brutal, and I can't promise the outcome will be worth the pain. Amy was quiet for a long moment, picked up her sandwich, took a small bite, chewed mechanically, finally spoke. Last week I stood in my mother's room at the care facility, and she didn't recognize me. Looked at me like I was a stranger invading her space. The woman who raised me, who taught me to stand up for myself, who always said silence in the face of wrong made you complicit, she didn't know who I was. And I thought, what's the point of her teaching me those lessons if I don't have the courage to live them? You have plenty of courage. You're here. So what happens now? Now you go back to work, do your best on the PIP, and document every interaction with Scott. I'll do the investigating. In 2 weeks, maybe 3, we'll have enough to move forward. Marcus slid a card across the table with his direct number. You call me anytime. Day, night doesn't matter. If Scott retaliates, if you feel unsafe, if you just need someone to confirm you're not crazy, you call. Amy pocketed the card, finished half her sandwich in silence. When she stood to leave, she paused, hand on the table. The other women, Rebecca and Jennifer and Lisa, they really want to help. They really do. Then maybe there's hope. Well, week 2, late February. Derek Harrison proved more competent than his attitude suggested. By Friday, he'd pulled together preliminary files on Scott's 8-year history, but the real work was just beginning. Marcus's phone rang during dinner Tuesday night, Julia's number. Emma's at my apartment. She showed up an hour ago asking about Sienna. Marcus's blood went cold. Emma, Sarah, Sienna's mother who disappeared 4 years ago and hadn't bothered sending a birthday card since. What did she want? To see her daughter. Said she's been thinking about Sienna since seeing you in that video, that maybe it's time to reconnect. Julia's voice carried barely contained fury. Marcus, she's talking to a lawyer. Mentioned your unstable new lifestyle and Sienna's asthma attacks as evidence you can't provide a stable environment. I told her to leave, but she knows your schedule now. She knows when Sienna gets out of school. She could show up at PS 112 and you wouldn't be there to stop her. Marcus looked at Sienna across the table, happily eating spaghetti and reading a library book about monarch butterflies, completely unaware that the mother who'd abandoned her was circling back like a predator who'd smelled blood. Thanks for the heads up. I'll handle it. How you can't get a restraining order against someone who has parental rights even if they haven't exercised them in years. I'll figure something out. He hung up. Sienna looked up from her book, perceptive eyes narrowing. Who was that? Aunt Julia, just checking in. You're doing your worried face. Marcus tried to relax his expression, failed. Daddy's dealing with some complicated stuff at work. Nothing for you to worry about. But you're worried. I'm always worried. It's my job as your dad. Sienna accepted this with the logic of 8-year-olds went back to her book. Marcus cleaned up dinner on autopilot, mind racing through scenarios. Sarah showing up at school. Sarah demanding custody visits. Sarah using his viral fame as evidence he couldn't provide a stable environment because he was too public, too controversial, too different from the quiet janitor she'd left. His phone buzzed. Kate Bennett marked urgent. Marcus, we have a problem. 2 board members are pushing to shut down your investigation before you submit findings. They're claiming it's disruptive to company morale and potentially exposes Silverstone to unnecessary legal liability. Which board members? Thomas Bradford and Mitchell Pearson. Both have financial ties to Richard Sterling. Both golf with Scott Thornhill. Kate's voice carried the strain of someone fighting battles on multiple fronts. I'm holding them off for now, but they're threatening to call an emergency vote if you move forward with termination recommendations. How much time do I have? 3 weeks. Maybe a month at most. Marcus, if the board votes against you, I can override as CEO, but it'll cost me political capital I need for other fights. Are you certain the evidence will be solid enough to justify that expenditure? Marcus thought about Amy Donovan's shaking hands, about Rebecca Walsh's text offering testimony, about 8 years of buried complaints and 7 women whose careers had been destroyed or derailed because protecting profit mattered more than protecting people. Give me 3 weeks to build the case. The evidence will be ironclad. 3 weeks. I'll hold them off that long. Weeks 3 to 4, March. The next 3 weeks dissolved into pattern. Marcus dropped Sienna at 8, interviewed witnesses until 3, picked her up precisely at 3:30. Derek and Patricia worked longer, pulling personnel files, cross-referencing complaints, building the timeline that would either save Amy Donovan or prove the system was unreformable. Week 3 brought Jennifer Blake's testimony, recorded, notarized, devastating. She described her own harassment in detail, Scott's escalating comments, the supply closet incident that mirrored Amy's experience, the $50,000 NDA that had bought her silence and her resignation. I took the money because I had student loans and rent, and I was scared, she told the camera. But I've regretted it every single day since. If releasing me from that NDA means Scott can't hurt anyone else, then do it. Week 4, Patricia tracked down Lisa Whitmore in Boston, convinced her to break her NDA if Silverstone released her legally. The evidence mounted like snow before an avalanche. 8 years, 7 victims, and now they had something even more damning. 14 emails showing Sterling's direct coordination of the cover-ups. Derek had found them buried in archived server backups. Emails from Richard Sterling to Scott Thornhill to former Director Phillips to executives across the company. Instructions on how to handle HR situations quietly. Offers to coordinate appropriate compensation for complainants. In one particularly damning exchange, Sterling had written explicitly, Scott's too valuable to lose over he said, she said situations. Make this go away. Marcus called Amy twice weekly. How's the PIP? Always the same answer, impossible, but I'm trying. Scott was setting her up to fail, and they both knew it. The 30-day clock ticked down while Marcus raced to build a case strong enough that Scott's termination would be inevitable rather than debatable. Patricia compiled witness statements. Derek built spreadsheets, cross-referencing dates, victims, NDAs, financial payouts. Together, they assembled a 20-page report that read less like corporate HR documentation and more like a federal prosecution brief. And through it all, Marcus kept his promise home by 3:30 dinner with Sienna homework help, bedtime stories. The nightmares came less frequently, only once a week now, instead of twice. Progress, however small. Week 5, mid-March. Wednesday afternoon, the school called. Mrs. Mitchell's voice carried professional concern that immediately spiked Marcus's heart rate. Mr. Wright, there was an incident during recess. Sienna got into an altercation with another student. Is she hurt? No, but she pushed Tommy Martinez after he said something that upset her. We've talked to both children and Tommy's parents are here. I think you should come down. Marcus checked his watch. 2:15, he'd planned to work until 3:30, but this couldn't wait. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He found Sienna sitting in Principal Davis's office, arms crossed, jaw set in that stubborn way she'd inherited from Sarah. Tommy Martinez sat across from her with his mother, a woman Marcus vaguely recognized from school drop-offs. Principal Davis, a gray-haired woman who radiated disappointed authority, gestured Marcus to a chair. "Mr. Wright, thank you for coming. We're trying to get to the bottom of what happened during recess." "Sienna, you want to tell me?" Sienna's lip trembled, but she kept her voice steady. "Tommy said Daddy was a fake hero, that people on the internet said you only helped that lady to get famous, that you don't really care about helping people, you just wanted to be on TV." Marcus's chest constricted. This was it, the price of viral fame finally landing on Sienna's 8-year-old shoulders. "And what did you do?" "I told him it wasn't true, that you help people because it's right. He kept saying mean things and I pushed him." Tommy's mother leaned forward. "My son has a bruise on his shoulder. What your daughter did was assault Mr. Wright. What your son did was bullying." Marcus kept his voice level. "And if we're throwing around legal terms, let's talk about the emotional harm caused by telling an 8-year-old that her father is fake." Tommy was just repeating what he heard online. "Then maybe you should monitor what Tommy's consuming online instead of teaching him to weaponize internet comments against classmates." Principal Davis raised a hand. "Let's everyone calm down. Sienna, physical violence is never acceptable, even when you're defending someone you love. You need to apologize to Tommy." Sienna's jaw set harder. "He needs to apologize first. That's not how this works." "Then it's not fair." Sienna looked at Marcus, eyes pleading for backup. "Daddy says standing up to bullies is what good people do. I was standing up for you." Marcus felt the floor drop out. She was right. He had taught her to stand up, to speak out, to defend what was right. And now the school was asking her to apologize for applying those lessons while the actual bully faced no consequences. "Principal Davis, may I speak with my daughter privately?" "Of course, conference room next door." Marcus led Sienna out, closed the door behind them, knelt down to her eye level. "Bug, I'm proud of you for defending me. That took courage. Then why do I have to apologize? Because the world doesn't always work the way it should. Sometimes the rules protect bullies and punish people who stand up to them. That's not fair, but it's reality. So I should just let people say mean things? No, you should find better ways to fight back than pushing." Words, adult intervention. Making Tommy feel small without touching him. Marcus pulled her into a hug. "I know it's hard. I know you wanted to defend your dad. But I need you to trust that I can handle people saying mean things, and I need you to stay out of trouble so you don't give them ammunition to hurt you." Sienna cried into his shoulder. "I just wanted them to stop." "I know, baby, I know." They went back. Sienna apologized through tears. Tommy mumbled something that might have been an apology if you were feeling generous. His mother left looking vindicated, and Marcus left feeling like he'd taught his daughter exactly the wrong lesson about justice. That night, Sienna woke up at 2 a.m. screaming. Marcus ran into her room, found her tangled in sweaty sheets, hyperventilating, eyes wide with panic. "Can't breathe, Daddy, I can't breathe." Asthma attack, triggered by stress. Marcus grabbed her inhaler, helped her take 2 puffs, counted breaths, while trying not to let his own panic show. Sienna's breathing gradually steadied, but the fear in her eyes didn't fade. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I'm sorry I pushed Tommy. I'm sorry you have to deal with this. I'm sorry I'm so much trouble." "Hey, look at me." Marcus cupped her face. "You are never trouble. You're the best thing in my life. None of this is your fault. But if you weren't famous, nobody would be mean to me. And if I hadn't helped Ms. Bennett, I wouldn't have this job that lets me afford your medicine. Would you want me to go back to the way things were?" Sienna thought about this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice. "No, but I want people to be nice again." "Me too, Bug, me too." Julia arrived at 6 a.m. after Marcus called her in desperation. She took one look at Sienna's pale face and Marcus's exhaustion and pronounced judgment. "You can't keep doing this. Working 18-hour days dealing with internet fame, fighting corporate corruption, and parenting a traumatized 8-year-old. Something's going to break. What choice do I have? You call Kate Bennett and tell her you need to scale back hours. You're not superhuman, Marcus. You're allowed to have limits." Marcus looked at his sister, saw the worry carved into her expression. She was right. He'd been running on adrenaline and stubbornness in the fantasy that he could somehow do everything perfectly if he just tried hard enough. Week 6, late March. He called Kate at 7 a.m. Thursday morning, expected voicemail got her instead. Marcus, everything okay? No, he explained about Sienna, the attack, the stress fractures spreading through his life. I need to cut back hours. 3:30 is my hard stop every day, no exceptions. No weekend work. Sienna needs me present, and I can't do this job if I'm destroying her, the process. Kate was quiet for a long moment. Of course, whatever you need. Family first always. But Marcus, we're 2 weeks from the board meeting. Can you finish the report by then? Derek and Patricia can work overtime to compensate. I'll finish it. But after that, I need different boundaries. Done. And Marcus, you're not failing by having limits. You're modeling good judgment. Thursday afternoon, Marcus met with Kate's legal team about Emma's custody threat. Ms. Brennan, the senior attorney who'd handled Kate's divorce, reviewed the texts and voicemails Emma had left with Julia. She has standing as biological mother. But 4 years of zero contact, no child support abandonment during medical emergencies, family court won't favor her. We can get a temporary restraining order preventing unsupervised contact or school pickup. How much? $3,000 retainer. Marcus's stomach dropped. $3,000 he didn't have. Kate started to speak. I've got it. Julia, who'd somehow appeared in the doorway of the conference room. Consider it Sienna's college fund protection. Emma doesn't get to waltz back because her ex is famous. Julia, I can't. Yes, you can, and you will. Julia's expression brooked no argument. Family takes care of family. That's what Mom and Dad would have said. The restraining order was granted within a week. Emma's lawyer, some strip mall ambulance chaser she'd found on Craigslist, sent one angry letter threatening a protracted custody battle, then silence. She'd wanted access to Marcus's spotlight, not actual motherhood. When the light was blocked by legal paperwork and the prospect of actual parental responsibility, she disappeared again. Marcus knew it probably wasn't permanent. Emma would resurface eventually when the next crisis or opportunity arose. But for now, Sienna was protected. That was enough. Derek and Patricia worked overtime those final 2 weeks. The report came together 72 hours before the board meeting, 20 pages of documented evidence, witness testimony, pattern analysis, and legal citations. Marcus read it 3 times, checked every footnote, verified every claim. Then he walked it to Kate's office personally. This is everything. Got Thornhill's harassment spanning 8 years, Sterling's coordination of the cover-up, Philip's complicity. The evidence is overwhelming. Kate read in silence, face carefully neutral. When she finished, she looked up with something like awe. This is a federal prosecutor's indictment. That's the idea. If we move forward with this, if we terminate Scott and expose Sterling's involvement, we're declaring war on some very powerful people. The board will fight. Sterling will sue. This could cost Silverstone millions in legal fees and settlements. Or we do nothing and tell 7 women that their trauma doesn't matter as much as corporate liability. Kate closed the folder. I'll call a board meeting for Friday. Present your findings, make your recommendation. I'll back you, but Marcus, you need to understand the politics here. Half the board is terrified of Sterling. They'll look for any excuse to bury this. Then we don't give them any excuses. Week 7, early April. The board meeting felt like walking into an ambush. 8 members sat around the table. Marcus recognized Colonel Patterson, but the rest were strangers whose expensive suits and practiced authority marked them as people accustomed to having the final word. Kate made introductions. Thomas Bradford, CFO, looked at Marcus like something he'd scraped off his shoe. Mitchell Pearson, head of strategic partnerships, didn't bother hiding his hostility. The others maintained professional masks. Gentlemen, Ms. Chen, thank you for making time. Kate gestured to Marcus. Our director of ethics has completed an investigation that requires board attention. Marcus? He distributed copies of the report, watched their expressions shift as they read the executive summary. Bradford's jaw tightened. Pearson actually smiled like he'd been waiting for this. Marcus walked them through the evidence methodically. Scott's pattern of harassment, the buried complaints, Sterling's emails coordinating cover-ups, the financial cost of NDAs paid from company funds, the legal liability Silverstone faced for systemic failure to address known misconduct. My recommendation is immediate termination of Scott Thornhill for cause. Additionally, I recommend we release the all employees from harassment-related NDAs and offer them the opportunity to pursue legal action if they choose. Finally, I recommend we conduct a comprehensive audit of all ethics complaints from the past decade to identify other cases of systemic failure. Pearson leaned back, arms crossed. That's corporate suicide. You're talking about exposing the company to dozens of potential lawsuits, destroying relationships with key investors, and publicly admitting institutional failure. The PR alone would cost us millions. The alternative is continuing to protect predators and hoping nobody notices. The alternative is managing this quietly. Fire Scott, but if you must, but the rest is unnecessary theater. 7 women filed complaints that were buried. 3 more left, rather than keep working in a hostile environment. How is justice for them unnecessary theater? Bradford cut in. Mr. Wright, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're new to corporate governance. These situations require nuance. We can address Scott's misconduct without burning down the entire company in the process. By nuance, you mean another cover-up. I mean protecting stakeholder value while still doing the right thing. Colonel Patterson spoke for the first time. Thomas, with respect, there's no nuanced way to handle conspiracy to cover up sexual harassment. Either we acknowledge what happened and make amends, or we become complicit in it. Easy to say when you're not worried about stock prices. The argument escalated. Marcus watched the board fracture along predictable lines, Patterson and 2 others supporting full disclosure. Bradford and Pearson pushing for damage control, the remaining members trying to stake out middle ground that satisfied nobody. Kate let them argue for 15 minutes before calling order. We need a vote. The question is whether to accept Marcus's recommendations in full, including Scott's termination and NDA releases. All in favor? Patterson raised his hand immediately. 2 others followed, Sarah Chen from legal and an older woman Marcus didn't recognize. Opposed, Bradford, Pearson, and 2 others. That's 4-4. Kate's voice carried steel. As CEO, my vote breaks the tie. I vote him in after Marcus's recommendations are approved. Pearson stood face flushed. Kate, this is a mistake. You're prioritizing headlines over operational stability. I'm prioritizing employees over politics. If that's a mistake, I'll own it. Bradford and Pearson left together whispering. The message was clear. This wasn't over. Week 8. Mid-April, Marcus delivered Scott's termination letter personally Monday morning. Brought Derek and Patricia as witnesses, kept his voice level and professional, while Scott cycled through disbelief to rage to threats. You have no idea what you've started. Richard Sterling will destroy you. He'll destroy this company. I'll sue for wrongful termination and take everything you have. You're welcome to try. Marcus set down the evidence folder. Every complaint, every witness statement, every email where Sterling coordinated your protection. This goes to court, all of it becomes public record. You sure you want that? Scott's face went from red to pale. You're bluffing. Read the file, then call your lawyer. You've got 15 minutes to collect personal items before security escorts you out. Security came. Scott left cursing. And Marcus felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just the tired relief of someone who'd crossed one threshold and could see the next one waiting. Amy Donovan appeared at his office door an hour later. Her eyes were red, but her smile was genuine. He's really gone. He's really gone. And you're being taken off the PIP with a formal apology from the company. Amy sat down heavily, like her legs couldn't hold her anymore. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. But Amy, this is just the beginning. We're releasing you and the other women from your NDAs. If you want to pursue legal action, the company won't fight it. If you want to go public with your story, we'll support you. It's your choice. After years of having no choice, that's almost harder. Marcus understood. Freedom after captivity required learning to walk again. Week 9, late April. The lawsuits arrived 3 days later, 2 of them delivered by process server to both Marcus personally and Silverstone Corporate. Richard Sterling was suing for defamation and emotional distress, claiming Marcus's baseless accusations had damaged his reputation. Scott Thornhill was suing for wrongful termination, claiming the investigation was a vendetta driven by personal animus. Kate called an emergency meeting. Her office felt smaller, with lawyers present, three of them sharp-eyed and expensive, already calculating billable hours. "Gentlemen, my friends, what are we looking at?" The senior attorney, Ms. Brennan, flipped through the filings. "Sterling's suit is weak. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, and we have his emails. Scott's wrongful termination claim is more problematic. He'll argue the investigation was rushed and motivated by Marcus's personal desire for publicity rather than genuine evidence. The evidence is documented in a 20-page report, which a jury might see as manufactured after the fact to justify a predetermined outcome. Scott's lawyers will paint Marcus as an overzealous vigilante playing hero." Ms. Brennan looked at Marcus with professional appraisal. "Your viral video is admissible evidence of your character and motivations. They'll use it to suggest you're fame-seeking rather than justice-seeking." Marcus's stomach dropped. The video that had given him this opportunity was now ammunition against him. Kate's jaw set. "How do we fight this?" "We prove the investigation was thorough, objective, and followed proper procedure. We document every step, every interview, every piece of evidence. And we prepare Marcus for depositions where Sterling's lawyers will try to break him." The media coverage started the next day. Fox News ran a segment, "War Veterans PTSD Makes Him Dangerous in Corporate Setting." The Wall Street Journal published an op-ed, "When Social Justice Warriors Infiltrate Business." Reddit threads debated whether Marcus was a hero or a liability, whether his military background made him prone to aggression, whether someone without a college degree should be running an ethics department. Sienna came home from school crying for the third time that week. Another kid, not Tommy this time, someone else had told her that her daddy was crazy, that people online said he attacked innocent businessmen because he couldn't tell the difference between war and corporate meetings. Julia showed up unannounced with wine and takeout and the exhausted fury of someone who'd reached her limit. "This needs to stop, Marcus. Sienna can't take much more of this." "I know." Marcus drank wine straight from the bottle. "But we're committed now. Can't stop halfway through a war. Just don't lose your daughter while you're winning the battle." Weeks 10-12 May. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source in week 10. Derek burst into Marcus's office Friday afternoon waving printouts like weapons. "Found something. Took some questionable hacking of Scott's personal email. So maybe don't ask too many questions about methodology, but look at this." The emails were between Scott and Sterling, sent from personal accounts rather than corporate ones. And they were explicit Sterling instructing Scott on how to handle the Donovan situation. Scott asking for money to motivate her departure. Sterling arranging payment from a shell company to avoid corporate records. "This is criminal conspiracy. This is us winning." Derek grinned. "Sterling just handed us evidence that his lawsuit is frivolous, and he knew exactly what Scott was doing. We take this to Ms. Brennan, she files it as evidence, and Sterling's case falls apart." Marcus read the emails 3 times, checking for any possibility they were faked or taken out of context. But they were real-dated, time-stamped, undeniably authentic. "How'd you find these?" Scott's password was password 23. "Some people deserve what happens to them." They took the emails to Ms. Brennan, who smiled for the first time since taking the case. "This changes everything. I'll file immediately. Sterling's going to have a very bad day when his lawyers see this." But before they could celebrate, Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from HR. A new complaint had been filed against Marcus, alleging he'd threatened and intimidated an employee named David Turner during an investigation, creating a hostile work environment. Marcus stared at the screen. "I've never interviewed anyone named David Turner." Derek was already typing furiously on his laptop. "No David Turner in finance. No David Turner anywhere in Silverstone's employee database. This complaint is fake." "Then who filed it?" Derek pulled up the email metadata. "Sent from an IP address registered to Sterling's law firm. He fabricated a complaint to discredit you." Patricia's expression went hard. "That's fraud. We can prove it's fraud. But Marcus, the board won't care. Bradford and Pearson will use this as ammunition to call for your termination regardless of whether it's real." The emergency board meeting was called for Friday morning of week 12. Marcus arrived early, found Kate already in her office, looking like she hadn't slept. "They're going to try to fire you. Bradford convinced 3 board members that you're a liability. The vote will be 4 against keeping you 3-4. and your vote breaks the tie, which means I'm using CEO authority to override the board's judgment. Again, Kate rubbed her temples. Marcus, if I do this, I lose political capital I need for other fights. Bradford and Pearson might resign. Stock will drop. Investors will question my judgment. Then let me go. I don't want you to sacrifice your position for mine. That's not how this works. Kate's voice carried an absolute conviction. You did everything right. You followed procedure, documented evidence, protected victims who couldn't protect themselves. If the board fires you for that, I fire the board. The meeting felt like a trial. Bradford laid out his case. Marcus was inexperienced, overzealous, had brought massive legal liability to the company, and now faced credible complaints about his own conduct. The David Turner allegation, even if fabricated, showed that employees feared Marcus's aggression. Patterson countered the Turner complaint was provably false, fabricated by Sterling's legal team, and using it as justification was participating in the same corrupt system they just dismantled. The argument spiraled. Marcus sat silent, watching his fate decided by people who'd never mopped a floor or filed a legitimate harassment complaint or understood what it cost to stand up when standing up meant losing everything. The vote came down exactly as Kate predicted. 4-3 against keeping Marcus. Kate didn't hesitate. As CEO, I vote to retain Marcus Wright. If any board member finds this decision unacceptable, your resignation will be accepted effective immediately. Bradford and Pearson stood simultaneously. This is unconscionable. You're choosing a janitor with PTSD over the board's judgment. I'm choosing integrity over politics. There's the door. They left. Kate turned to the remaining members. Anyone else? Silence. Good. Meeting adjourned. Marcus followed Kate back to her office, waited until the door closed before speaking. You just lost 2 board members. The stock is going to tank. Investors will revolt. Let them. Kate poured herself water with shaking hands. I'm tired of making decisions based on fear of consequences. Sterling tried to destroy you with a fake complaint. If I'd let the board fire you, we'd be telling every predator in corporate America that all they need to defeat accountability is a well-placed lie. This is going to cost you. Good things usually do. They stood in silence, the weight of what they'd just survived settling over them like dust after demolition. Kate, I need to ask you something. Why are you doing this? Really, not the official answer about company values, the real reason. She was quiet for so long. Marcus thought she wouldn't answer, finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. 3 years ago, my husband was driving drunk. We hit a semi. He walked away with scratches. I woke up in a hospital bed, unable to feel my legs. Doctors told me I'd never walk again. Physical therapy, experimental treatments, nothing worked. And my husband, the man I'd loved, trusted, built a life with, he stayed for 6 months. Then told me he'd married a whole woman, not a broken one, and left. Marcus's chest tightened. For a year, I wanted to die. Genuinely wanted it. Built this company into something powerful, climbed corporate ladders, proved I could succeed despite the wheelchair. But inside, I was screaming, waiting for someone and anyone to see me as more than either inspiration porn or an object of pity. And then you stepped forward at that gala, not because you felt sorry for me, because Richard Sterling was being cruel and you don't tolerate cruelty. Kate's hands were shaking now, the careful control finally cracking. For the first time in 3 years, someone saw me. Not the wheelchair, not the CEO, just Catherine Bennett getting humiliated, and you decided that mattered more than your job security. Marcus moved without thinking, knelt beside her wheelchair, so they were eye level. Kate, I'm not finished. Tears tracked down her face, but her voice stayed steady. You showed me what courage looks like when it's not about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing it anyway. That's why I'm backing you, because you reminded me who I wanted to be. Something shifted in the space between them. Marcus saw past the CEO, past the armor she wore to survive boardrooms and investor calls. Saw a woman who'd survived catastrophic loss and built something meaningful from the wreckage. Saw someone strong enough to be vulnerable. His hand moved to hers, fingers intertwining. Kate's breath caught. Marcus, I see you, not the chair, not the title, just you. They stayed like that, hands clasped, something fragile and terrifying building between them. Marcus felt the magnetic inevitability of two people who'd survived their own separate hells recognizing each other across the distance. Kate leaned forward. Marcus rose slightly. Their faces were inches apart, her breath warm against his mouth. He pulled back. I can't. Kate, I want to, but I can't. Hurt flashed across her face before the professional mask slammed back into place. Because of the wheelchair. No, God, no, never that. Marcus stood put distance between them because proximity made thinking impossible. Because I'm terrified. My wife left when I stopped being the man she married. I'm damaged, Kate. PTSD nightmares an 8-year-old daughter who needs stability I'm barely providing. You deserve someone whole. And you think I'm whole. Kate's laugh was bitter. I'm a workaholic using corporate success to avoid dealing with my own trauma. I haven't dated since the divorce because I'm terrified of watching someone realize they don't want a woman who can't walk. We're both damaged, Marcus. Maybe that's the point. Or maybe I'll hurt you. Maybe I'll wake up from a nightmare and not recognize you. Maybe Sienna will resent you for taking attention away from her, or maybe 1,000 things will go wrong and you'll be collateral damage. Those are all excuses. They're all true. Kate's expression softened. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. But Marcus, you're not as broken as you think you are, and neither am I. Marcus left before he could change his mind, took the elevator down feeling like he'd just walked away from something irreplaceable and necessary and terrifying. His phone buzzed as he hit the lobby, text from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Wright, this is Rebecca Walsh. I just heard you released us from our NDAs. I want to testify, not for money or revenge, so other women know they're not alone. Thank you for giving me my voice back. He stood in the marble lobby of Silverstone Global, reading words that meant 7 women would finally have justice, and felt the weight of what they had accomplished start to balance against the cost. Not enough to make it easy, but enough to make it worth it. Marcus walked out into April afternoon sun, headed toward the subway toward Siena, toward a future that looked nothing like what he'd planned, but maybe, just maybe, looked like something worth fighting for. Sterling would keep fighting. The lawsuits would drag on for months. The board was fractured. Stock prices would drop. Life would keep being complicated and messy and hard, but Amy Donovan was safe. Rebecca Walsh had her voice. 7 women knew the system could change if enough people refused to accept the unacceptable. And Marcus Thorne Wright, former soldier, former janitor, current ethics director, was learning that transformation hurt and cost everything, and was sometimes the only way forward. The butterfly wasn't born. It was earned through dissolution and reconstruction and the terrifying faith that wings would form from liquid chaos. He was still in the liquid stage, but somewhere ahead, he could almost see the possibility of flight. Revised full story. Part 3 of 3, Part 3, Transformation Revised section. A Discovery and Depositions May, July year 2 months, 07. The discovery phase began with Derek's questionable hacking, but the real treasure emerged 3 weeks into depositions when Sterling's attorneys were legally required to produce all relevant communications. Marcus sat in Kate's conference room, surrounded by boxes of printed emails, each one another brick in the wall they were building. Ms. Brennan spread the most damning ones across the table like a prosecutor arranging murder weapons. These go back 5 years. Sterling wasn't just aware of Scott's behavior, he was recruiting other managers to use the same playbook. Look at this one, to a VP in operations. The email laid out explicit instructions, identify high-performing female employees who might resist advances, document minor performance issues, to establish paper trails, create situations where rejection could be reframed as poor teamwork or attitude problems. It was a manual for institutional harassment dressed in corporate efficiency language. How many managers received this? Marcus felt bile rising. 14 that we've identified so far. Most are still employed. Some have complaints in their files that were resolved the same way Scott's were NDAs, quiet exits, performance improvement plans for victims. Patricia entered carrying another box. Legal just sent over the financial records we subpoenaed. Sterling's discretionary fund paid for 23 NDAs over 5 years. Total payout, $847,000. All of it structured to look like standard severance or relocation assistance. The scope was staggering. This wasn't one bad supervisor protected by negligent oversight. This was systematic corruption designed to shield predators while punishing anyone who threatened the machine's efficiency. Derek pulled up a spreadsheet on his laptop. I cross-referenced the NDA recipients with employment records. 18 of the 23 were women under 30. 15 worked in departments managed by the 14 names on Sterling's distribution list. The pattern is so obvious a first-year law student could prosecute this, which is why Sterling's lawyers are going to fight like hell to keep it from ever reaching a courtroom. Ms. Brennan gathered the emails with the care of someone handling enriched uranium. These documents prove enterprise-level conspiracy. If this goes to trial, Sterling faces potential criminal charges beyond civil liability. Kate had been silent throughout, reading email after email with an expression that shifted from shock to fury to something colder and more dangerous. When she finally spoke, her voice could have frozen nitrogen. I want every manager on that distribution list investigated. If they participated in this system, they're gone. I don't care about institutional knowledge or operational disruption. We're burning this down to the foundation and rebuilding. That's 12 senior executives. Patricia's tone carried warning. The company will struggle to function during that kind of upheaval. Then we struggle. Better to collapse doing the right thing than succeed by protecting evil. Marcus recognized the calculus shifting in real time. Kate had gone from fighting one battle to declaring total war, and the casualties would be measured in careers and reputations and the comfortable lies people told themselves about just following orders. His phone vibrated. School nurse. Marcus's stomach dropped before he even answered. Mr. Wright, Sienna's having an asthma attack. We've administered her emergency inhaler, but she's not responding well. Ambulance is en route to Mount Sinai. The conference room disappeared. Marcus was already moving, grabbing his jacket, calling Julia to meet him at the hospital because his hands were shaking too badly to drive, and rational thought had been replaced by pure primal terror. Kate appeared beside him at the elevator. I'm coming with you. You don't have to. I'm coming. They rode in a taxi. Marcus didn't remember hailing Kate's wheelchair folded in the trunk, neither of them speaking, because words felt insufficient against the roar of fear. Sienna was supposed to be safe at school. Sienna was supposed to be protected from the chaos Marcus had invited into their lives. Sienna was 8 years old and couldn't breathe, and that was the only fact that mattered. Mount Sinai's emergency department operated on a different timescale, simultaneously glacial and frantic, doctors moving with purposeful urgency, while Marcus stood frozen in a waiting room that smelled like antiseptic and despair. Julia arrived 17 minutes later, pulled him into a hug that nearly broke the last threads of his composure. She's going to be fine. Sienna's strong. This is my fault. The stress, the bullying, the constant uncertainty. I did this to her. You did your job. That's not the same as hurting your daughter. A doctor emerged an hour later looking tired but not devastated, which Marcus chose to interpret as good news. Sienna's stable. The attack was triggered by acute anxiety. We've got her on supplemental oxygen and steroids. She'll need to stay overnight for observation, but her lungs are responding to treatment. Can I see her, Bondion? Room 437. But Mr. Wright, we need to talk about stress management. This is her second severe attack in 6 months. The environmental triggers you mentioned in school bullying, family instability, those need to be addressed or we'll keep seeing her in this ER. Marcus nodded numbly, already mentally cataloging every decision that had led here. The job, the publicity, the choice to fight instead of keeping his head down. Every domino falling toward this moment where his daughter lay in a hospital bed because her father couldn't protect her from consequences of his own righteousness. Sienna looked impossibly small against white sheets, oxygen cannula taped to her face monitors, beeping steady reassurance that her heart still beat and her lungs still functioned. Her eyes were closed but opened when Marcus took her hand. Hey, Bug. Daddy, her voice came out whisper thin. I'm sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for. I do. I got scared at school. Tommy said his mom heard on the news that you're in trouble, that you might lose your and I couldn't breathe and... Marcus pressed his forehead against her small hand. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. Julia touched his shoulder, gentle pressure that meant she and Kate were leaving to give them privacy. The door clicked, shut, and Marcus was alone with his daughter and the machines monitoring her survival. Sienna, I need to ask you something important. This job, everything that's happening, it's hurting you, making you sick. If I quit, if we go back to how things were before, would that be better? Sienna was quiet long enough that Marcus thought she'd fallen asleep. Then her hand squeezed his with surprising strength. Do you remember my butterfly project? The metamorphosis bug. Mrs. Mitchell said the caterpillar doesn't know it's going to be a butterfly. When it's in the chrysalis turning to goo, it probably thinks it's dying, but it's not dying. It's changing into something that can fly. Marcus's throat closed. Maybe you are in the goo part, Daddy, and it's scary and it hurts and you want it to stop. But if you stop now, you never get to fly. You never get to be the person who helps people like that Lady Amy. But if it costs you, I'm okay. Sienna's eyes held clarity beyond her years. I got scared, but I'm okay. And I'd rather have a daddy who's scared but brave than a daddy who's safe but sad. Something fundamental shifted in Marcus's chest. His 8-year-old daughter had just given him permission to keep fighting, had offered absolution he didn't deserve and couldn't reject. She was choosing courage over comfort, asking him to model the lessons he'd taught her, even when those lessons hurt. I love you so much, Sienna Grace. I know. That's why you wanted to quit. But don't finish your butterfly thing. She fell asleep holding his hand, and Marcus sat in the hospital chair watching her breathe and understanding that protection sometimes meant letting go of safety. That being a good father wasn't about shielding Sienna from every storm, but about teaching her to stand in the wind without breaking. Kate was waiting in the hallway when he emerged hours later. She'd been there the whole time he realized, just waiting, giving him space but refusing to leave him alone. She's sleeping. Julia's staying overnight. Marcus felt exhaustion settle into his bones like radiation. Kate, I can't ask you to keep backing me when it's costing my daughter her health. What does Sienna say? She wants me to keep going. Then keep going. Kate rolled closer, took his hand with the same certainty she'd taken every other impossible decision. But Marcus, you don't have to carry this alone. Let me help. Let Julia help. Let the people who care about you share the weight. I don't know how. You learn. Same way Sienna's learning to be brave, one scared breath at a time. Sterling's deposition took place 3 weeks later in a conference room designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, a table that could seat 20 enough lawyers to staff a small law firm. Sterling arrived in a suit that cost more than Marcus's annual salary, radiating the particular arrogance of someone who'd never faced meaningful consequences. Ms. Brennan started gentle establishing timeline and Sterling's relationship with Scott. Sterling answered with practiced ease, the kind of smooth deflection that came from decades of talking to investors and boards and anyone else who might question his decisions. Then she showed him the first email. Sterling's expression flickered, barely perceptible, but Marcus caught it. Recognition, calculation, the moment when someone realizes they've underestimated their opponent. Mr. Sterling, do you recognize this email? I receive hundreds of emails daily. I can't be expected to remember each one. This email is from your personal account to Scott Thornhill, dated 3 years ago. The subject line reads, Handling Blake's situation. Do you recall sending it? Without context, I couldn't say, says. Brennan pulled out the metadata report, slid it across like a prosecutor presenting murder weapon ballistics. This email was sent from your personal laptop at 11:47 p.m. on March 15th, 3 years ago. The IP address matches your home internet connection. The device fingerprint matches a laptop registered to your name. Would you like to revise your answer? Sterling's jaw tightened. I may have sent it. Again, I handle numerous personnel matters. The email instructs Scott to resolve the Blake complaint quietly and offers to coordinate with Phillips for appropriate compensation. What did you mean by appropriate compensation? I don't recall the specific. Let me refresh your memory. Ms. Brennan laid out the financial records. 2 weeks after this email, Jennifer Blake received a $50,000 payment from one of your discretionary funds in exchange for signing an NDA. You arranged that payment, correct? I provide funding for various corporate initiatives, including paying women to stay silent about sexual harassment, Sterling's attorney objected. Ms. Brennan withdrew the question, moved to the next email, then the next, built a timeline of coordination and cover-up so detailed that denial became mathematically impossible. And with each new piece of evidence, Sterling's composure cracked a little more. The breaking point came 4 hours in. Mr. Sterling, at your previous deposition, you stated that Catherine Bennett was crippled and unfit to lead the company. Do you stand by that characterization? That was taken out of context. The court reporter transcribed your exact words. I can play the video if you'd like to review your statement. What I meant, you also stated that Ms. Bennett was desperate and clinging to Marcus Wright because no man would want a woman in a wheelchair. Is that an accurate summary of your testimony? The careful control finally shattered. Sterling's face flushed red, and when he spoke, his voice carried venom he'd been suppressing for hours. Yes, I said it because it's true. Catherine Bennett has been overcompensating for her disability since the accident. She's paranoid about being seen as weak, so she makes emotional decisions instead of business decisions. Hiring Marcus Wright, a janitor with PTSD and no relevant qualifications, that was desperation, not leadership. Ms. Brennan let the words hang in the air, while her co-counsel typed furiously, and the court reporter captured every syllable for the permanent record. And you believe Mr. Wright's PTSD makes him dangerous. I believe a man with untreated combat trauma who physically confronted security guards has no business running an ethics department. He's a vigilante playing hero, and Catherine enabled him because she's too damaged to see clearly. Marcus watched Sterling self-destruct with the grim satisfaction of someone witnessing justice arrive through spectacular stupidity. Every word was admissible. Every insult would be read by a jury. Sterling had just handed them his reputation on a platter and asked them to destroy it. The deposition ended shortly after. Sterling's attorneys looked like they'd aged 10 years. Ms. Brennan packed her briefcase with the calm efficiency of someone who'd just won a case that hadn't technically started yet. That went well? Her understatement was deliberate. He admitted everything. Marcus couldn't quite process what had just happened. On the record, with witnesses. Pride makes people stupid. Sterling's so accustomed to power protecting him that he forgot words have consequences when you can't buy your way out of them. Ms. Brennan smiled with predatory satisfaction. We'll have a settlement offer by tomorrow morning. They know this can't go to trial. The offer arrived at 9:47 a.m. the next day. $5 million to Silverstone. Public apology from Sterling. Marcus keeps his position. All parties sign mutual NDAs, preventing further litigation or public comment. Kate called Marcus to her office to review the terms. The board was already pressuring her to accept $5 million was more than they'd expected. The apology would satisfy public relations concerns, and the NDAs would prevent Sterling from continuing his media campaign against the company. What do you think? Kate looked exhausted in ways that went beyond physical tiredness. The past 2 months had cost her board members investor confidence and the comfortable illusion that doing right would be rewarded instead of punished. I think Amy Donovan doesn't get justice from a settlement. Neither do Rebecca or Jennifer or any of the other women. Sterling writes a check, issues a statement his PR team drafted, and learns the lesson that money solves everything. The board expects me to accept. Then don't. Marcus met her eyes across the desk. You've already burned half your political capital on this fight. Might as well finish what we started. Kate was silent for a long moment, fingers drumming against her armrest in the unconscious pattern Marcus had learned meant she was wargaming consequences 3 moves ahead. If we reject this and go to trial, we're looking at months of litigation. More legal fees. Sterling's team will drag you through depositions designed to break you. They'll investigate every aspect of your life, military service, PTSD treatment, Sienna's school records. They'll try to prove you're unstable, vindictive, using this position to play out some hero fantasy. I know. They'll come after me too. Suggest the wheelchair makes me mentally unstable, that I'm pursuing vengeance against Sterling instead of running a company. Stock will drop further. More board members might leave. Investors will demand my resignation. Probably. Kate's expression hardened into something Marcus recognized from the night she'd fired 2 board members for trying to protect Sterling's conspiracy. Resolve tempered in fire and impossible choices. Inform Ms. Brennan we're rejecting the settlement. We go to trial. Section B, trial preparation. August, October year, 2 months, 8:10. The trial was scheduled for November, 5 months after Marcus had stepped between Sterling and Kate at a corporate gala that felt like ancient history. Those months passed in controlled preparation, witness prep, document, review, mock examinations, where Ms. Brennan played hostile attorney and tried to make Marcus lose his temper or contradict himself. Sienna started therapy in August, processing the anxiety that had sent her to the emergency room. Her therapist was Dr. Sarah Morrison, a woman who specialized in children dealing with parent-related stress. She taught Sienna breathing exercises and coping mechanisms and gave her permission to be angry about the situation instead of pretending everything was fine. Julia attended every session, took notes, helped Sienna practice the techniques at home. Marcus tried not to think about how Julia's own job was suffering while she picked up his parental slack, tried not to calculate the debt he was accumulating to people who loved him enough to carry weight he couldn't manage alone. Kate and Marcus developed a rhythm that wasn't quite friendship and wasn't quite romance, but contained elements of both. Coffee meetings that ran long, strategy sessions that veered into personal territory, moments when their hands touched and neither pulled away immediately. The awareness between them grew like pressure before a storm building towards something inevitable that neither was quite ready to name. 2 weeks before trial, Marcus found Kate working late in her office despite the building being mostly empty. He knocked entered when she gestured sat across from her in the visitor's chair that had become his unofficial spot. You should go home, sleep. Trial starts Monday. Can't sleep anyway, might as well be productive. Kate closed her laptop, rubbed eyes that carried evidence of too many 16-hour days. Marcus, I need to tell you something. Okay. When you pulled away, that day in this office when I thought we might, she started again. I told you I'd wait until you were ready. I meant it. But I need you to know waiting doesn't mean I've stopped wanting. Marcus's breath caught. They danced around this for months, maintained professional boundaries that became harder to justify with each shared crisis. The pull between them had mass and gravity now bending space around their orbits. I'm scared. The admission came easier than expected. My marriage ended because Sarah thought I'd become less than what she signed up for. I look at you, brilliant, successful, someone who could have anyone, and I think, why would you choose damaged goods? Because you're not goods damaged or otherwise. You're a person who's survived hell and come out still capable of caring about other people's pain. That's not damage, Marcus. That's steel tempered in fire. I have nightmares. Sometimes I wake up not knowing where I am. I've got a daughter who needs to be my priority. I work a job that's currently costing us millions in legal fees and might end with me fired and unemployable. And I can't walk. I have chronic pain that some days makes it hard to think. I'm married to a company that's trying to destroy itself through ethical transformation. We're both complicated. Kate rolled closer, took his hands in hers. But maybe complicated people deserve complicated happiness. I don't know how to do this. Relationship vulnerability, trusting someone won't leave when things get hard. Neither do I, but Marcus, we don't have to know everything right now. We just have to decide if we want to try. He looked at their intertwined hands. Thought about Sienna's butterfly metaphor about dissolution and reconstruction, about the terrifying faith required to believe that wings would form from chaos. After the trial, his voice came out rough. Win or lose, after it's finished, let's try. Really try. Kate smiled, the first genuine joy Marcus had seen from her in weeks. After the trial, they sat in her office while the city hummed 42 stories below, hands clasped, neither speaking because words felt less necessary than presence. Tomorrow they'd return to battle, but tonight they gave themselves permission to imagine a future where the fighting was finished and something gentle might grow in the wreckage. Section C, the trial. November year 20, month 11. Federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan smelled like old wood and institutional gravitas. Marcus arrived Monday morning wearing the best suit Kate's lawyers had bought him, specifically for trial, feeling like an imposter playing dress-up. The courtroom was smaller than television suggested, more intimate, and somehow more intimidating for its human scale. Jury selection took 3 days, but Ms. Brennan moved efficiently. The final panel was evenly split on age and gender, mostly middle-class workers who might understand corporate power dynamics from the bottom looking up. Opening statements began Thursday. Sterling's attorney, Robert Vance, painted Marcus as a glory-seeking vigilante who'd used false accusations to destroy an innocent investor's reputation. He painted Scott as a scapegoat, the harassment claims as vindictive lies, and the whole investigation as Marcus's attempt to manufacture heroism. Miss Brennan countered by walking the jury through 8 years of buried complaints, showing them the pattern of abuse and systematic cover-up. She introduced them to Amy, and Rebecca and Jennifer promised they'd hear testimony that would prove beyond doubt that Sterling had orchestrated institutional corruption. Amy took the stand Friday afternoon. Ms. Brennan walked her through the timeline, gently establishing Scott's escalating harassment, Amy's formal complaint, the retaliatory performance review. Amy's voice shook but held steady, and when Vance cross-examined her, she didn't waver. "Ms. Donovan, isn't it true you smiled at Mr. Thornhill during your interactions?" "I smiled politely when he approached me. That's basic professional courtesy." "And you wore, by your own admission, dresses to work. Some might call that inviting attention." "I wore professional business attire. Nothing I wore justified unwanted touching or being cornered in supply closets." The jury leaned forward when Ms. Brennan asked her final question. "Why are you here, Ms. Donovan? What do you hope to gain from testifying?" Amy looked directly at the jury, voice clear and steady. "I want other women to know that speaking up doesn't have to mean losing everything. That sometimes the system actually works if enough people refuse to let it fail." Jennifer Blake and Rebecca Walsh testified Monday and Tuesday of week 2. Each woman described her own harassment, the NDAs, the years of silence that had eaten away at them, until seeing Marcus's investigation gave them courage to speak again. Vance tried to paint them as motivated by money, but their testimony was too raw, too detailed, too clearly born from genuine trauma. Marcus took the stand Wednesday afternoon. Ms. Brennan walked him through his background: military service, the Silver Star, the decision to work as janitor to support Sienna. Established him as credible, competent, motivated by duty rather than glory. "What did you observe that night at the gala, Mr. Wright?" Richard Sterling was drunk. He approached Ms. Bennett and began making comments about her wheelchair, suggesting the Takahashi board had only accepted the merger out of pity. He implied she was unfit to lead because of her disability. She asked him to stop. He didn't. He got more aggressive, leaned into her space, made it clear he viewed her disability as weakness. Then he reached to touch her shoulder in a way that was clearly meant to be condescending. She flinched, and I couldn't watch anymore. "Why not?" Marcus took a breath, aware of the 12 jurors watching him, of Sterling glaring from the defense table, of Kate sitting in the gallery. "I spent 4 tours in places where powerful people abused vulnerable ones. Watched what happens when good people stay silent because intervening costs too much. I came home believing I'd left that behind, that America was supposed to be different. And then I watched 20 executives stand in a boardroom while a billionaire humiliated a woman in a wheelchair, and not one of them said a word." Vance's cross-examination tried to paint Marcus as aggressive, PTSD damaged, unable to distinguish between combat zones and corporate settings. But every question gave Marcus opportunity to clarify, to explain, to demonstrate that his trauma made him more perceptive about power dynamics rather than less. "Mr. Wright, you have nightmares about your military service, correct?" "I do, but I've never mistaken my daughter's bedroom for Kandahar. My PTSD is managed through therapy and medication. It doesn't make me dangerous." "But you did physically confront security guards at the gala." "I redirected their attempts to grab me using standard defensive techniques. Neither guard was injured. Both confirmed in their statements that I never attacked them." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Vance, I'm not claiming to be perfect. I'm claiming to have done my job competently and honestly. Those aren't the same thing as being damaged." The jury nodded. Several took notes. Sterling took the stand. Thursday, Ms. Brennan demolished him methodically, showed him email after email, walked him through financial records, got him to admit he'd called Kate unfit to lead because of her wheelchair. "Mr. Sterling, you stated in your deposition that Ms. Bennett makes emotional decisions instead of business decisions because of her disability. Do you stand by that?" "I believe her judgment has been impaired by personal trauma, yes." "Sentiment that resulted in exposing your systematic cover-up of sexual harassment. Sentiment that revealed you'd spent nearly $1 million silencing victims. Sentiment that proved you'd coordinated with managers across the company to protect predators at the expense of vulnerable employees, Miss Amon." Brennan's voice carried contempt sharp enough to cut. Is that the kind of sentiment you object to, Mr. Sterling? The kind that prioritizes people over profit? Sterling had no good answer. The jury had heard enough. Closing arguments, Friday felt almost anticlimactic. Vance tried to resurrect reasonable doubt. Ms. Brennan simply reminded the jury of what they'd heard women's voices. Sterling's emails, Marcus's straightforward testimony about right and wrong. This case isn't complicated. Richard Sterling abused his power to protect men who harmed women. Marcus Wright investigated, found evidence, and recommended appropriate action. The only question is whether you believe powerful men should face consequences for their choices, or whether having money and connections means accountability doesn't apply. The jury deliberated 6 hours. When the foreman read the verdict, Marcus felt time compress. In the case of Sterling versus Wright in Silverstone Global, we find for the defendants on all counts. Furthermore, we award Silverstone Global $2.5 million in damages and legal fees. The courtroom erupted. Kate covered her face with her hands. Amy burst into tears. Julia grabbed Marcus in a hug that nearly knocked him over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Marcus gave them one statement. This verdict isn't about me. It's about making sure that speaking up doesn't destroy you, that systems can change when enough people demand it. Then he walked toward where Sienna and Julia were waiting, toward his daughter, who'd encouraged him to finish his butterfly transformation toward a future that suddenly looked possible instead of terrifying. Section D, Resolution 1, 6 months later. May year 3, 6 months dissolved in the careful work of rebuilding. Marcus watched Silverstone transform through Kate's iron will and the evidence they'd compiled during trial. 12 senior executives were terminated after internal investigations. The ethics department expanded from 3 people to 15. Anonymous reporting systems were implemented with third-party oversight. The stock price recovered after an initial drop. Employee satisfaction surveys showed engagement up 47%. Amy Donovan was promoted to senior analyst. Rebecca Walsh joined Silverstone's board as external ethics advisor. Jennifer Blake started a nonprofit supporting harassment victims. Colonel Patterson attended the 6-month celebration dinner, though he'd retired from the board. Found Marcus at the bar. Proud of you, Sergeant. 12 lives you saved in Kandahar. 94 complaints resolved here. You're still in the business of bringing people home. Different kind of war, sir. Same principles. Protect those who can't protect themselves. Lead from the front, never leave anyone behind. Patterson clasped his shoulder. Your father would have been proud too. Marcus's throat tightened. His father had died when he was 12. Patterson, knowing that remembering it meant something. Kate called him to her office one afternoon in late May, 6 months and 2 weeks after the verdict. Marcus arrived expecting another case review, found her standing beside her desk in a way that made his breath catch. She was using crutches. Still needed the wheelchair for long distances, but physical therapy and experimental treatments had given her some mobility back. Not much, but enough to stand when she chose to. Kate, don't, she smiled. This doesn't mean I'm fixed. Some days I can stand for 10 minutes. Other days the pain is too much. But I wanted to be eye level when I asked you something. Marcus crossed to her close enough to catch her if she fell far enough to give her space. We said after the trial, it's been 6 months. I'm done waiting, Marcus. I'm done pretending this is just friendship or professional respect. I'm in love with you, and I need to know if you feel the same. Every excuse Marcus had used to keep distance between them evaporated. The fear of failure, the worry about Sienna, the certainty he'd eventually hurt someone who trusted him, all of it felt like cowardice dressed as caution. I'm terrified of this. I know. I'm still damaged. Still have nightmares. Still wake up sometimes not knowing where I am. I know. And I love you anyway. Have loved you since you stood in this office and told me you'd fight even when fighting cost everything. Kate's smile could have powered the eastern seaboard. She set down her crutches, let Marcus catch her weight as he pulled her close. Their first kiss tasted like victory and vulnerability, and the particular sweetness of something earned through suffering. When they finally separated, Kate was crying, and Marcus realized he was too. Sienna might not be ready for this. We need to go slow, let her adjust. We'll go however slow she needs. Kate touched his face. But Marcus, I'm not going anywhere. Not when things get hard. Not when you have nightmares. Not when loving you costs more than I planned. I'm staying. Promise. I promise. Joa. Section E Resolution 2. The Science Fair March. Year 5, 24 months condensed into moments. Kate and Marcus moved in together that summer. Sienna called her by first name, never Mom. That word stayed reserved for someone who'd earned and then forfeited it. But she included Kate in school projects, asked her to attend plays, slowly built trust in increments. Emma tried one final custody play that fall. Kate's lawyers buried it in paperwork and legal fees until she disappeared again, this time for good. Marcus's nightmares decreased twice monthly instead of twice weekly. Therapy helped. Kate's presence helped more. Sienna learned the signs would appear at his bedside with her stuffed rabbit. Daddy, you're home. You're safe. The company continued its transformation. 94 complaints handled in 2 years, 52 substantiated, 9 senior managers terminated. Employee satisfaction climbed. Harassment reports dropped because people trusted the system now. Derek ran the investigations team, 12 people properly funded. Patricia joined the board as ethics advisor. Amy Donovan led the data analysis division. Jennifer Blake's nonprofit supported harassment victims nationwide. Julia got promoted to crisis center director. Colonel Patterson retired from Silverstone's board, but called Marcus monthly, just checking in, Sergeant. Sarah Caldwell became VP of Operations. And on a Saturday in March, 4 years after a janitor had stepped between a CEO and a billionaire, Sienna Wright stood before PS 112's Science Fair with a project titled How People Transform. Marcus and Kate sat in the audience, Kate in her wheelchair, because the school's accessibility was terrible and standing for 90 minutes wasn't an option, while Sienna set up her display board. 3 photographs, Marcus in uniform, Marcus mopping floors, Marcus in his office at Silverstone. Arrows between them labeled dissolution and reconstruction and flight. Sienna was 12 now, showing the first hints of teenage self-consciousness, but carrying herself with confidence born from surviving hard things. My project is about metamorphosis. Her voice carried clear and strong. Most people think butterflies just grow wings, but that's not how it works. Inside the chrysalis, the caterpillar completely dissolves, turns into liquid. Everything it was breaks down before it can rebuild into something new. She gestured to the photos. 4 years ago, my dad was a janitor. Before that, he was a soldier. Now he directs ethics for a major corporation. Some people think those are 3 different people, but they're the same person transforming. A student raised their hand. What made him transform? Choice. Sienna said it with absolute certainty. The caterpillar doesn't know it'll become a butterfly. It just keeps living until the change happens. My dad chose to help someone when no one else would. That choice started his metamorphosis. Oh, she looked directly at Marcus. The project asks what we learned. I learned that transformation hurts, that the goo stage is scary, that you don't know if you'll survive it. But I also learned that sometimes you have to dissolve completely to become who you're meant to be. And that's not just about butterflies, it's about people too. The presentation earned first place. Sienna accepted her ribbon with grace, then immediately ran to Marcus and Kate, wedging herself between them for a photo that captured the family they'd built from disparate pieces. They celebrated with lunch at the bistro, 3 blocks from their apartment. Marcus, Kate, and Sienna claimed their usual corner booth, while Saturday crowds swirled around them. First place state qualifier. Sienna grinned around a mouthful of sandwich. Mrs. Mitchell says if I keep developing the research, I could submit it to the Youth Science Symposium. Kate reached across the table, squeezed Sienna's hand. We're so proud of you, sweetheart. Thanks, Kate. Sienna said it easily now, the name feeling natural after 2 years of building this particular kind of family. Marcus watched them, his daughter and the woman he loved, and felt something settle in his chest. Not completion exactly, but rightness. The sense that all the dissolution and reconstruction had led somewhere worth the pain of transformation. Kate cleared her throat. Actually, there's something I wanted to discuss with both of you. Sienna perked up. Good news or bad news? Good news, I hope. Kate looked at Marcus. The board offered me a contract extension. 5 years increased compensation, full operational authority. I told them I'd only accept if they agreed to make the ethics department a permanent C-suite position. Marcus's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. Chief Ethics Officer. You'd report directly to the board, same as I do. Budget authority, hiring power, veto capability on any decision with ethical implications. They agreed unanimously. Sienna looked between them. That's a promotion, right? Like a really big one. It would be. Marcus met Kate's eyes. But it also means more visibility, more pressure, more chances for people to criticize or attack. Is this the part where you ask if I'm okay with it? Sienna set down her sandwich with exaggerated patience. Because, Daddy, I'm 12. I've watched you fight billionaires and win. I've seen you on the news. I know what you do matters. And yeah, sometimes it's scary, and sometimes kids are mean about it. But I'd rather have a father who does important things than a father who plays it safe. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just finally started listening. She grinned, then turned serious. Take the job. Help more people. Fly as high as you can. I'll be okay. Kate reached for Marcus's hand across the table. Sienna comes first, always. That's non-negotiable. Obviously. Marcus squeezed her hand, looked at his daughter. Then yes, I accept. They sat in the bistro while lunch crowds swirled around them, two people who'd survived their separate catastrophes and found each other in the aftermath, plus one extraordinary 12-year-old who'd learned courage by watching her father choose it daily. Not perfect, not healed, but better together than they'd ever been apart. Sarah. Section F, final close. That evening, Marcus found Sienna in her room, headphones on, homework spread across her bed. She looked up when he knocked, pulled out her earbuds. Remember when you said I was in my chrysalis stage, turning to goo, becoming something new? Of course, that was literally my whole science project. Marcus smiled. I think the transformation is finished. I think I've got wings now. That's good, right? Flying is the whole point. Sienna studied him. You look different, less worried. I am less worried, not about everything, but about whether the fight was worth it. Was it? Marcus thought about Amy Donovan now leading a team, about 7 women whose voices had been restored, about a company culture transformed from toxic to accountable, about Sienna, 12 years old and confident enough to tell him to keep flying. Yeah, Bug, it was worth it. He left her to her studying, wandered to the living room where Kate was reading case files. She looked up when he entered, a question in her eyes. Talk to Sienna. She gave her approval with the condition that I keep listening to her sage wisdom. Smart kid. The smartest. Marcus sat beside Kate on the couch they'd picked out together in the apartment they'd made into home. I'm accepting the promotion. But Kate, I need you to promise something. Anything. If I start becoming the kind of person who forgets why this matters, who gets caught up in boardroom politics and corporate maneuvering and loses sight of the people who need protecting, you call me on it. Pull me back. Remind me that the calm is about people, not positions. I promise. But Marcus, I don't think you're capable of forgetting. It's not in your nature. Maybe she was right. Maybe the years of mopping floors invisibly had permanently calibrated his compass toward the powerless rather than the powerful. Or maybe staying grounded required constant vigilance, daily choices to value what mattered over what was easy. Either way, Marcus Thornwright, former soldier, former janitor, current chief ethics officer, permanent father to an extraordinary daughter, was ready. Outside their window, the city hummed with its usual chaos. Somewhere, an 8-year-old who'd feared losing her father had become a 12-year-old proud of who he'd become. Somewhere, a woman in a wheelchair had proved that strength came in forms people rarely recognized until they needed it themselves. Somewhere, 7 women who'd been silenced had their voices restored. And in a modest apartment that smelled like Kate's coffee and Sienna's art projects, and the particular warmth of people who'd chosen each other, Marcus sat with the family he'd built and understood that metamorphosis was never about becoming someone different. It was about becoming more fully who you'd always been meant to be. The caterpillar had dissolved, broken down completely in the darkness of the chrysalis, turned to liquid chaos, lost everything it thought it was. But from that dissolution had come reconstruction. From that chaos form, from that ending flight. Marcus checked on Sienna one last time before bed. She'd fallen asleep with her homework still scattered around her ribbon from the science fair pinned to her bulletin board. He tucked the blanket around her, turned off the light, stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her breathe. Alive. Safe. Here. The 3 words that still mattered more than any prayer. The butterfly remembered being a caterpillar. remembered the ground, the slow crawl, the vulnerability of having no wings. But it flew anyway. And sometimes not every day, but often enough to matter. Flying felt less like defying gravity and more like finally coming home.